slum house. Like I can.
I hate when those kids say that. My daughter.
That's what I want for you. I said,
Okay, good evening, everybody.
what you would earn.
Could I have your attention, please? Good evening.
Right, but he didn't want to be on duty.
Am I on? Good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock. It's time to start the meeting. I would like to call the meeting to order, please.
Can we have everyone's attention, please? The chair is asking for attention.
Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please.
Mrs. De Silva,
Here.
Mrs. Gillis,
Here.
Mr. Valentine,
Here.
Mrs. Messig,
Here.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Here. Now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. It's recommended that the board approve the September 8th, 2025 regular meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. De Silva. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Messick. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Messig,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. It's recommended to approve the September 22nd, 2025 regular work session meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Valentine. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. De Silva. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. Messig,
Yes.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. It's recommended to approve this evening's agenda as presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Messick. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Valentine. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Messig,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Awards and recognitions. Mr. Brony.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, it's my honor to introduce the Golden Shamrock Award, which started in 1990. It was founded by my good friend Ed Podnacki, an active community member in Dublin as well as business owner. This award was created to recognize staff members in our district who have made outstanding contributions and have had a significant impact through the work that they do each and every day. Tonight, we have 2 award winners, and at this time, I'd like to ask Tom Cochran to come to the podium to say a few words about our first award winner, Carrie Craddock.
Thank you, Brian. It is my honor to introduce our Golden Shamrock Award winner, Miss Carrie Craddock. She is assistant principal at Dublin Scioto High School. Hi, Carrie, behind the pole there. Carrie had a long list of well over 20 people that nominated her, and her being the Golden Shamrock winner. So I wanted to just share a couple of those nominations because they said it best. The first one said, upon meeting Carrie, you'll notice that she has been an inspiring can-do attitude throughout her career. She always encourages everyone around her to be more and to do more. She never gives up supporting every student, and we are extremely grateful for her efforts towards making processes better and more efficient for our school. Another person said, she supports staff, she never runs from a challenge, and she does everything possible to meet students where they are and to ensure that everyone feels safe in our building. Another comment, Carrie is a constant source of both support for employees and students. She shows up for each day with empathy, reliability, and a genuine commitment to success. Carrie is a thoughtful and collaborative thinker, always solution-oriented, always student-centered. Carrie is deeply invested in the entire school community and works hard to foster an environment where people feel valued and supported. And then last, Carrie is the true definition of a leader in action. She embodies flexibility, clear communication, and an unwavering care for both students and staff. I've been working for around 30 years in education, and I've been around a lot of talented people, and I will say that Carrie is one of the best that I have had the honor to work with. I would say that she's a true value add, and a value add to me is somebody that makes everyone better in the organization that they are around. So Carrie, congratulations on your Golden Shamrock. It is well deserved.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know I got to talk. So I want to say thanks to Tom. I've been in Dublin for this is year 11. So I taught at Coffin, now I'm at Scioto, so a lot of people helped me out along the way, and I appreciate everybody who has been a part of my journey. Thanks.
All right, thanks so much. Congratulations, Carrie. And then for our next award, I'd like to invite Miss Katie O'Neill to the podium to present the next award to Jennifer Longwell. Katie?
All right, I'm a little shorter than everybody else, so. All right, so I'm Katie O'Neill. I am absolutely thrilled and quite honestly honored to be here this evening to celebrate Jen Longwell and this award. Words our cell staff use to describe Jen include tireless advocate, leader, rational, mentor, kid-centered, talented, impactful, dedicated, empathetic, team player, unwavering support, promoter of cultural awareness, personable, compassionate, professional, poised, wise, role model, and friend. Jen embodies the spirit of Dublin City Schools, where she once attended as a student and now serves as a passionate teacher leader and advocate for both students and staff. Jen, you're a powerful force. Your energy and positivity inspires everyone around you, and I am so honored to be here with you tonight. Congratulations.
You know, just a couple things. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone here. I am a product of this district. I went to school here. I graduated here. My brother graduated here. My mother taught here at Dublin City Schools for many, many years. We owe a lot to this district. I couldn't be prouder to be a product of this district, and most importantly, working at one of the greatest middle schools, I think, in the world, John Sells Middle School. And thank you so much for this wonderful award. I'm still shocked, to be honest with you. Thank you so much.
Okay, moving on the agenda, we do not have a tolls update this evening as Mr. Melody is not here. And for public participation, there is no one signed up for action items on the agenda, so we will continue on with our Board of Education Committee reports.
Do you want to start? You can start if you want. I just have one. The key communicators met on October 8th, and as you can imagine, the discussion was redistricting and what's happening next. Cassie shared with key communicators that well, now we've received over 3,000 responses to the online survey. And some of the issues around the map, such as Map 3's free and reduced lunch information being wrong. But basically the message that she wanted to get out there was to be here tonight, if not in person, then to watch online. So that's pretty much what we discussed. So, yeah, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Yes, overall it was a positive discussion that needed to happen. So I'm happy that happened on Wednesday. And then this past Friday, we had the Student Superintendent Advisory Committee. Mrs. Rigby and I attended. It was the first meeting of the year where they welcomed new students to the group. And they had an opportunity to address Dr. Marshausen and also get questions answered by Lori Marple, which was really interesting to be a part of that discussion, to hear about class choices they were looking forward to, lots of questions and excitement. So very good meeting.
The academic subcommittee met on October 7th. Lori Marple reviewed the 25-26 Teaching and Learning Board approval requests, which include the middle school academic programs in November/December, high school academic programs also in November/December, looking at ELA electives, and also in regards to the middle school academic programs, likely to see elective additions there. As far as the ELA electives go, they're especially looking at ones that have lower enrollment, like yearbook and school paper. We'll also have K-12 math, science, and health resource selection in March. In April, we will have K-12 art, K-12 PE, various academies, ELA, high school elective graded course of study, and that will require 2 reads for approval. Kathy Parker-Jones gave instructional technology updates on her work, making sure that the district's technology vendors are all SB 29 compliant with student data privacy law. All of the vetted vendors are on the DCS website and also included in the annual update. She also discussed AI in the schools. Teachers have completed AI PD, and now the district is focused on the student AI literacy. She went over tools such as Magic School Bus, Notebook LM, and Gemini. Jen Hinderer discussed pathway programming updates, including pathway maps that are being created to help advise and guide students through different possible pathways. She also discussed the Associates program, which would allow our students to get credentialing through Columbus State Labs. Once they have that credentialing, they can go on to earn an associate's degree. Pete Curdy shared updates on the English learning transition to teaching and learning. And as you know, the district now has an EL director and 2 coordinators, one for primary and one for secondary. He is currently on a listening and learning tour and shared several ways in which they are already strengthening Tier 1 collaboration and communication. Lori Marple discussed 612 scheduling preparation, looking at possible English learning changes and how they might positively affect the ability to take electives and or participate in other programs. And again, looking at EL electives and possible science changes, particularly the double blocked science courses. And we're getting to the time of the year where we have the Capitol Conference and also the OSB legislative delegate assembly. So that means that we are updating the legislative platform, and I would be, as the delegate, the one voting to say yes or no to whatever changes have been proposed. Whatever is in the legislative platform is what the OSBA lobbyists are allowed to lobby for or against on behalf of public schools. So if you want to take a look at some of the changes and give me input on how you would like for me to vote, or if you would like a report at the next meeting on how, on what I think, I can do that as well. But I have the printed copy of some of the changes here if you would want to take a look.
Is that it? Amy, did you have anything else? Okay. All right. Thank you. Moving on to the student representative update. Brick, take it away.
Hello. This week has been pretty tame among the high schools. Kaufman, their first theater performance of the year is coming up. This is similar with, I believe, Jerome. Jerome is also, their CAP mentor program is going very well with like helping freshmen just like get used to with everything with the school year and just the next quarter coming up, studying tips, work. Also at Jerome, varsity golf competed at States today, and the boys and girls both won. The Scioto girls volleyball team won the OCC, which is very exciting. The Kaufman Marching Band is currently ranked second in the state in its conference. Also at Jerome, the Wind in the Willows is coming up soon in the theater department. Probably the most important thing is that if your child is taking a IB exam, the details and payment information for pay schools is ending on October 15th. So that needs to be done, or like there's fines and that sort of jazz. Another thing, the most positive thing probably, is that fall break is happening this week. And I do not mind a 4-day week, a 4-day weekend, and then another 4-day week. That's very exciting. This is also the last week of the grading, like the last week of the quarter. So this is all very exciting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to reports from the superintendent's office. Dr. Marshall.
As we start this evening, a couple of facts that we just would like to share with the community. First of all, in the fall of 2020, we conducted the Focus on the Future project with Planning Next, which surveyed our community and looked at options on how we would handle increasing high school enrollment over the next decade or so. As a result of those surveys, the decision to put the addition on Scioto High School was made, and Mr. Stark and his team, he moved over there, Mr. Stark and his team have done an excellent job with our building projects and preparing to have that addition ready to welcome students at Scioto High School next fall. Our school boundaries are our school boundaries, and we often receive questions about how the school boundaries were drawn and if they are flexible. School boundaries came to being over a lot of years, over a lot of different changes and additions, and our school boundaries are pretty much set. There are school boundaries. And as a school district, we have no control over growth and development within our school community. The various municipalities that we have the opportunity to work with are the ones who oversee planning and zoning, oversee permits, and oversee their growth in these areas. And although we represent multiple municipalities, counties, townships, all Dublin City School residents pay the same millage and same school taxes to our schools as a community. Since April, when we held our first webinar on the topic, I've accepted the responsibility of redistricting. Our board policy clearly places the responsibility for redistricting with the superintendent. Since the beginning, I've leaned into that, determined to shield the Board of Education and our team from a process that I knew would be arduous, challenging, and likely prompt emotional and passionate responses from our families and our community. As I shared at the beginning of the school year at our convocations, our theme as a district this year is always growing, embrace the journey. With one of our core values, we model that we don't always get it right, but we take responsibility and we get better each and every day. During this process, I have certainly made some missteps along the way as superintendent, and I own my actions and continue to grow and learn as a leader. It was never my intent to mislead anyone during this process, and we have made several course corrections over the past month. Since the board meeting on September 22nd, and after my one-on-one meetings with members of the Board of Education, we have released 3 maps to our community to gather information. As we've already shared this evening, we've received over 3,000 comments through our feedback form, and our partners at Cropper GIS have reviewed every survey response. I have received hundreds of emails about redistricting. I have read every single email. In addition, we have commissioned a traffic study, which the Board of Education has, and will be made available to our community through a link on an update from this meeting. The study was based on the 3 maps that we released, plus 1 additional data point that we'll talk about for a map that was introduced in the public. Our culture playbook highlights the importance of the power of alignment. During this process, I've recognized the uncertainty about the consideration of socioeconomics in balancing redistricting. I have tried to be consistent in my message and my words, making clear one of the 8 criteria is to not worsen socioeconomic balance during redistricting. Between our email engagement and our survey results from Cropper, our commitment to the public for engagement is clear. After tonight's meeting, we will once again welcome the community to provide comments through the Cropper GIS website. Those comments will be open through Friday, October 24th. New comments based on conversations between the board members and ourselves tonight will be shared with the internal planning team on Monday, October 27th, and with the Board of Education and community on Wednesday, October 29th. Again, we will have a public conversation as a leadership team at the Board of Education meeting on October 29th. I remain committed to providing the board and community with a final map on November 10th. My primary goal as superintendent has not changed: to provide a balanced enrollment at all 3 high schools, ensuring equitable access to opportunities in the most financially responsible manner. Our policy 5120 outlines the responsibilities for the superintendent in redistricting. Those policies intersect with the criteria that we have been using during our elementary and middle school redistricting process, and now during the high school redistricting process. We have remained consistent during this time. The first of the criteria from the board is student enrollment and building capacity. 2 of our 8 high school redistricting criteria meet this goal in Board Policy 5120, balancing facility utilization and accounting for future growth. We also look at student safe transportation and travel. 3 of our criteria meet the board policy for safe student transportation and travel: contiguous zones, maximizing efficiency in transportation, and close proximity. When we talk about convenient access to our schools, 3 of our 8 meet this criteria under the board policy: establishing contiguous zones, using major roads and natural boundaries, and close proximity. When we look at financial and administrative efficiency, we look at our economic diversity, our clear feeder patterns, and again, maximizing transportation efficiencies. And finally, when we look at the effectiveness of our instructional program, we look at balancing facility utilization and considering economic diversity. We just would like to be clear that as we've gone through this process, while the policy places the responsibility for redistricting on the superintendent, our team has followed the board's policy in the areas that we have considered. This past week, our team has come together and met to look at the 3 maps that were proposed to our community, and also to look at a concept that was created in the public. When we looked at each of these criteria, we scored them on a Likert scale of 0 to 10, and the scores were tallied and summed to determine the team's preferences. Also shared tomorrow in a recap of this meeting will be the link to those survey results for the community to see how the internal planning team ranked each of those areas. When we look at what those results were during the process and what we will do next, I think it's important to have a deeper understanding of how the team viewed each of the 8 criteria when they were scoring it, and we spent time as a team going through to ensure we were aligned in the meaning of each of these. So at this time, I'd like to start with our Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Jennifer Schwanke, to share some of the thoughts on 2 of these areas.
Thank you, Dr. Marshausen. The 2 that I will be speaking to will be balancing school facility utilization and maximizing building, I'm sorry, my eyesight, you guys. It's embarrassing. Efficiencies. Okay, so we as an internal planning team, our enrollment projections, both short and long term, highlighted the need for a really proactive solution to manage short-term capacity in our buildings and long-term growth. Projections showed us that even with the addition that we have put onto Jerome High School, we'll face overcrowding in the near future. Furthermore, all significant long-term growth is forecasted for the Jerome attendance area, creating an imbalance with Kaufman and Scioto as Kaufman and Scioto populations remain stable. By redistricting students to Scioto High School, we could immediately alleviate capacity pressure, and our goal was to create more balanced, sustainable enrollment distribution across all 3 high schools for the future.
Another criteria that the internal planning team looked at was close proximity. And in looking at the map options, proximity is just that, the nearness of individual home locations to the actual high school. And so as a team, this was something that we looked at fairly closely and looked at each map to see in neighborhoods how close homes were to high school buildings.
For busing efficiencies, just to give a little background, at the end of every August of every school year, transportation has to hand in what's called a T2 report. And these are available for anyone to see. And what a T2 report is, it's all of our costs for transportation. It includes labor, maintenance, fuels, tires, you name it. It's all in our costs. And then we have to use these costs that we handed in. It's like a per mile, however you want to use it, on any type of analysis we do anytime we do routing. So when it comes to the maps that you see up here, even though they might have been scored differently by the IPT team, for transportation, we score all the maps basically the same. All the maps raise our costs by just a little bit. And what I mean by a little bit, it's about 0.5% of our transportation budget. One might have a little bit more pro than con. As far as the amount of time a student is on the bus, it's all the maps were very, very similar with that. So based upon our costs and that, we do have some challenges in transportation with these maps, but no different than the challenges we have today. We have a driver shortage. We'll continue to have a driver shortage with these maps. And we do have to work with academics on some of the bell times to make things easier. And that's a situation we have today and on these maps here.
As we saw in the crosswalk earlier, establishing contiguous zones fell under both the safe student transportation and travel and the convenience of access to schools in the policy side. Contiguous zones are connected areas like entire subdivisions, while non-contiguous areas could be considered islands or satellite zones on the maps. And so in this particular area for me, it was simply how well the proposed attendance areas in each draft were geographically connected.
When thinking about the criteria titled Establish Clear Feeder Patterns and Continuity, we were looking at the middle school feeders into our high schools, looking to have middle schools split no more than 2 times, and having those splits be as even as possible, with a recommendation to try to keep any splits to not drop under 25%.
As the district's public information officer, I have had a front row seat to this redistricting process. Over the past several weeks, I've read hundreds of emails, met with our key communicators, observed the internal planning team's work, and listened carefully to the conversations happening among our staff and in our community. Through all of this, there has been much discussion and much learning around one specific criterion, which reads, consider economic, cultural, and ethnic diversity. Ensure schools are inclusionary and not adversely affected by redistricting decisions. This criterion exists to ensure that we do not draw new boundaries and unknowingly or inadvertently discriminate against any group of students or families. Yet one question continues to surface and remains open for interpretation. What does it truly mean to ensure schools are inclusionary and not adversely affected by redistricting decisions? When this work began, Dr. Marshausen and Cropper GIS approached it with a clear and practical focus: to alleviate overcapacity at Jerome High School, to evenly distribute and balance enrollment across all 3 high schools, and to do so in a fiscally responsible way. But as this process has continued, through internal planning, community input, and staff discussions, the conversation around this specific criterion has broadened. Many view considering economic diversity not just as maintaining stability, but as an opportunity to intentionally redistribute the needs of our students more evenly among our high schools. As different perspectives have emerged, it's clear that they have all come from a shared place of care for our students. Yet they do lead us to think about the work ahead in very different ways. When we began discussing the addition at Scioto, our message, the message that I sent to the community, was about growth, about making 3 equal-sized high schools. Dr. Marshausen has stayed focused on that original goal, creating 3 high schools of comparable size, each serving roughly 2,000 students. That has been the consistent, steady target of his work. At the same time, I've heard from many of my peers and of our own educators who see this through a different lens, the classroom lens. They see firsthand how student needs, whether academic, social, behavioral, or economic, shape teaching and support. All of our high schools offer the same curriculum. They all have excellent teachers, and they all provide high-quality instruction. However, it is true that the needs of students yield different outcomes at each school. That reality is why many believe this criterion deserves to be examined critically, because it impacts real students, real teachers, and real classrooms every day. These are important and deeply human conversations in this district. And in hindsight, I think we all wish we had more time to explore what this particular criterion means to us as a district and to our community. To continue this work responsibly and transparently, I believe we must come to a shared understanding on how this criterion should shape the future of our high school boundaries. That clarity is the only thing that will help us determine how we move forward together in this important work.
Thank you to Cassie and our team. As you can see from these scores here, out of a possible 1,200 points, map 1 received 719, map 3 received 719, map 1 received 629, and map 2 received 550. If Mrs. Dietrich could go to the next slide. There were, in many survey results, a concept that was talked about, and that was moving Jerome Village directly from the northwest quadrant to Scioto High School. Even today, we were receiving emails as a board suggesting that the best thing for us to do would be to take Jerome Village and move them and Eversole to Scioto. We did test the public concept against the criteria, and this is where the public concept fell as scored by our internal planning team. All of this data, again, will be available for folks to see, and the individual scores on each one, as well as the standard deviation on the responses by the folks that filled this out. A couple things from our survey feedback from the first part of let's call it phase 1 of the survey feedback. Drafts 1 and 3 were preferred with strong opposition to map 2, which is similar to what the internal planning team feedback scored. Strengths in map 1 were neighborhood continuity and transportation efficiency. Weaknesses were the utilization and the demographics. For map 3 in our public feedback, strengths were identified as transportation efficiency and demographics. Our public feedback also showed weaknesses as transportation efficiency and feeder patterns. When we looked at the community priorities as shared overall through our survey results, the community priorities were keeping neighborhoods and contiguous zones together, efficiency in transportation, busing, biking, and walking, and our feeder patterns. Collecting data will begin again tonight through October 24th, and Cropper GIS will continue to analyze open-ended responses for the qualitative themes. We will refine and revise a redistricting proposal by October 29th. We commissioned and have the results of a traffic study, which will be released to the community as part of the update for this meeting tomorrow. The traffic study looks at 17 locations in our community. Each of these locations were chosen by our partners at MS Consulting, our engineering firm that did this study. Each of those maps were looked at from Jerome, Kaufman, and Scioto, depending on the applicable map for each of those areas. In each area, there are multiple criteria that will be shown. For example, from Glacier Ridge Metro Park's south entrance, it shows the distance to both Jerome and Kaufman, time during AM peak, afternoon dismissal, PM peak, and any major bottlenecks have been identified. It also shows bike and pedestrian routes, whether there are bikeways and sidewalks that allow for access, whether those are lighted along the way, and any major crossings that students would have to do on bikes or walking to and from their homes to that location. And finally, it does demonstrate where there are major hills or grades, such as coming up from the river if you're going on either side of Riverside Drive. All of those will be available to the public as we go through this process and likely look to analyze continued iterations of these maps. At this time, I will open up comments, questions, and feedback from the board. Mrs. Rigby, I will let you
Thank you.
go first or decide how you want to move forward.
Thanks, Dr. Marshausen. I have asked that the board ask a couple of questions and then move on to the next board member so that all board members get a chance to speak. And then we'll go around again if there are additional questions to make sure every board member is able to ask everything that they came prepared with tonight. So, Mrs. Messick, do you want to start us off and go that way, or? Okay.
So my question is, because I know that at least I asked, as well as several other board members might have asked, why were there no original maps drawn that showed north of Glick Road being redistricted originally?
One of the criteria that Mr. Cropper and I discussed early was that we wanted to leave subdivisions together and not break up subdivisions. And when we look north of Glick Road and the subdivisions that are there, getting enough students to move to Scioto from that area would have required separation and breaking up of subdivisions. That was one of the initial criteria that I shared with Mr. Cropper when we began developing maps.
Thank you. Then map 2, I believe, splits Grizel 3 ways, as that is also one of the key criteria that you had said you did not want to do. Why was that map put forward?
When we were selecting the maps to put forward for the community, we were looking at concepts that represented multiple maps along the way. Map 2 was a concept that represented moving some lower socioeconomic students to Kaufman as a way to balance the enrollment, but also balance socioeconomic differences. So that map was chosen because of the demonstration of that conceptually on a map.
Can you define what a neighborhood or subdivision is?
Well, I think when we look at neighborhoods and subdivisions, one, you will look at places that have homeowners association, communities authorities, places where communication is provided from the neighborhood, from the HOA, to the members of the community, where in many cases they are partners of the school district. So they help with communication and help with consistency in that communication. So that's the primary focus of when I consider what those areas are.
Okay. Dr. Marshausen, some criticism that has come your way has been that initially maybe you took on more of this process and acted as an individual rather than considering the team. And I just would like you to address what your thought process was initially. I know what we're charged to do. I know what the board policy says, but I would just like for the community to understand your early thoughts and your early, thoughts, whether it's maps or when and how to involve the planning team and what that looked like from your perspective from the outset of the process.
Well, I think from the outset, first of all, the goal was to follow a similar process that we did with elementary and middle school redistricting. And during the elementary and middle school redistricting process, Mr. Cropper and I created the initial maps that went before the internal planning team. The internal planning team, as a guide and resource to the superintendent who is charged with making this decision, would provide that feedback, would provide their expert opinions, because each of the members of that team represents a different approach, a different role within the organization. As we went through this process, my initial goal was to do things the same way, was to enter the process, to work with Mr. Cropper in his expertise as someone that we contract with, to be able to work with him to create maps and then to respond to the concerns and the questions from the internal planning team along each step along the way. What became clear within the last several weeks is high school redistricting is a different challenge than elementary and middle school redistricting. Moving students around in a community like Dublin, when it's not a new building that you're assigning students to, but when you're assigning students to an existing building. And as we added that addition on Jerome in 2023 to address growth at Jerome in 2023, and then to make the decision based on a great deal of feedback in 2024, that in order to manage growth and have seats for students without going back to our taxpayers for additional money, the responsible pathway was to put an addition on Scioto and balance the three high schools. That decision, coupled with a process that didn't have as much opportunity for feedback that we did before, but it clearly wasn't the best way to do this now. And thanks to conversations with our board members, I believe we've corrected course. I believe we have re-engaged at a different level. And as we go through this, our goal is to continue to be able to do so.
Cassie or Scott, can you pull back up the grid that has the 8 different areas and then the ratings or rankings? Yep, that one. Can Dr. Marshausen or members of the team, can you guys elaborate further on the clear feeder patterns and how fully realizing that there's multiple people who have contributed to this illustration, but how we get to the point of 3, 1, and 2 in that order.
Without having the data in front of me, Mr. Valentine, map 3 has CAR is 100% of the students going to Kaufman High School and 100% of the Davis students going to Scioto High School, and pretty even splits when you look at the students from the other 3 middle schools as they matriculate to each of the different schools. So there's less splits in map 3, leaving middle schools and going to high schools. Map 1, it has less multiple splits, but the numbers aren't quite as balanced. And I think when we look at how do we help students with that transition from middle school to high school, keeping as many students in the same groups together is something that was considered as part of clear feeder pattern. As has been said before, map 3 splits one of our middle schools 3 ways. Map 2 splits one of our middle schools 3 ways. And I think that map 2 probably at this point is off the table as we look at what options are moving forward.
And as a piggyback to that, with this, I know that we're looking at middle school as the predominant guide when we talk about splits, but from an elementary school standpoint, clearly we've got a lot of folks who are part of Bailey community here tonight. How many of our elementary schools have students being split into 3 high schools currently?
We did not dig into look at elementary feeder patterns to high schools.
Okay.
We went down from elementary to middle when we did middle, and now we're looking middle to high. We did not create the chain of elementary going forward. Do we have one? No, it's not. It's not something we looked at. I'm looking at our team who did that.
All right, but this would, in this case, definitely split the Bailey community into 3 high schools. Is that correct?
That's what we've heard, yes.
Okay. Guys, just allow us, please, to have discussions. All right.
Question regarding the scoring. If we design the criteria of the 8 points, looking just kind of at the map, and if the score's out of 1,200 possible points, does this mean that we're now going to go back? It just feels like there's a lot of points on the table. Like, are we going to go back and I would think that if we created these points that are 8, that the perfect map would be we are hitting all 8 of them, and we're going to score more than 719 points.
I agree. And one of the things as we talked to the community on September 29th is, as we get through this conversation tonight, Mrs. Gillis, one of the things that I would like the board's consent to do is to revise 2 of these maps to try to get closer. I don't think there is a perfect map that will get 1,200 points. As I've been deep into this work for many months now, when you create a map that improves feeder patterns, you may create issues with proximity. And I'll give you a direct example. By having a feeder pattern where 100% of CAR students go to Kaufman High School, there are students that are south of Brand Road who can see Jerome High School from their home that would then be going to CAR. So to Kaufman. So when you look at feeder patterns, the way things are designed is that it's hard to get feeder patterns and proximity together. But I agree with you that we need a map that gets more than 719 points as we move forward. When we stood on stage and we had this conversation with the community on September 29th, and we released 3 maps, we were clear these are draft and working maps. And we, in full transparency, wanted to have conversations with you as a board and with our community about where we are at this time. And as we continue this conversation, and I'm hopeful to get feedback and guidance from the 5 of you as to what are the things that are important to the 5 of you. I'm hopeful to get some of that feedback, and all of us sitting here will take that back and work to improve what in my mind right now would be 2 of the maps.
Thank you.
I think that there are some misconceptions in the public about what actually transpired on September 22nd due to the fact that it was not all shown live, because we do not show public participation live. And one of the things that you have now said to me and to others that you misstated was about socioeconomics, when you stated that you did not take it into account at all, which at the time, since 4 of the board members had not seen maps with data on them, we were taken aback by. What did you actually mean by that statement? Because I know that there's been a lot of people asking that, is that going to be the overriding factor, which I do not think any of the board members asked it to be, but we wanted it to be one of the factors as laid out of the 8.
As I've stated tonight, and as I have said probably more times than I can count, the primary goal here is to balance the enrollment of our 3 high schools. There are 8 considerations that are taken into account as part of that work, and socioeconomics and not negatively affecting, not having a negative impact is one of those 8 criteria that we look at in achieving that ultimate goal, with the ultimate goal being balanced enrollment at our 3 high schools.
And just for a follow-up to that, why is socioeconomic status important to look at, as well as the race categories, including legal aspects with the race categories?
It would not be legal for us to use race as a determining factor in our school balance and our school boundaries. But as Mrs. Dietrich shared, you also don't want to create a result that you weren't counting on. You want to be mindful as you do this that there aren't unintended consequences to decisions that you're making. So we have race and ethnicity on there merely as a check to make sure we're not creating unintended consequences by the actions that we're taking. When it comes to socioeconomic status, socioeconomic status can legally be a consideration in the work that we do. We know that different groups of students have different needs, have different supports that are required, and have different processes that we go through. So as we put that on there, and I think, as Mrs. Dietrich said very well, my intent from the beginning was to not negatively impact those balances. I think it has become a much larger conversation among many in our school community, and what is that role and what should that be as we move forward. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to have some input from tonight as we continue this conversation.
I'm going to ask just one follow-up question because it goes along with it. Can you explain, this is a question I got repeatedly from emails, what the various colors mean for the race categories?
There were thresholds that were set in each of those areas with targets, and if something if a certain category got over 35%, or if it was below a certain percentage, they were kind of just warning signs to look at that, to draw your eye to what does that color mean, so that when Mr. Cropper keeps kicking out different versions of this for us to look at, correcting maps, moving a neighborhood in real time, you can see that, so that if there's something that you need to pay attention to, you can see it.
So Amy took part of my question there, but That's okay. So I would just like to have more of a discussion around the possible negative impact of socioeconomics being concentrated in one building, and what that concern looks like, and what, possible outcomes that we're talking about that we want to try to avoid.
And my team can jump in at any time if you would like. When we look at experience and opportunities at our schools, one of the things that impacts both are the students who are able to come to that school, and both the needs and the desires that they bring with them. And for us, when we look at our students, and socioeconomics is, free and reduced lunch is the easiest way for us to look at it. One of the conversations we've had as a team is, if it's something that's going to be more heavily weighted than not negatively impacting, we probably need to look at a lot of measures and not just free and reduced lunch. But free and reduced lunch is the measure that we have easily available to identify those socioeconomic needs. When we, in our case, look at this, there are a lot of different services that we provide students, and wraparound services that we provide students who come to us with different needs. And those wraparound services that support the language needs that students bring to us. We got a report earlier tonight, I believe by you, talking about the changes we've made in EL and what that looks like. All of those things fall into the experience that our students have at our different high schools. Do you want more? Or?
That's good for now.
Okay.
I'll ask more.
Are you going to ask more right now, or?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. I'm not sure how I want to phrase this. So, we have received hundreds of emails from the community, and I guess what I'm trying to balance tonight is the score from the internal planning team and looking at it through that lens, versus if we polled the community how they would feel. And we are doing that with the input in the survey. But, when I look at the criteria, I think, contiguous zones, very important for the community. I look at close proximity and the sense of community that entails. I look at clear feeder patterns for the stability of students, and having somewhat of an idea when you move into an area, or you've lived in an area, that you have somewhat of an idea where your student is going to attend school. Realizing that can change because we are growing. I'm not saying it's set in stone, but those things are important to the community, as is everything. But I feel like there's a weighting there for them, at least in the emails that I've received. And I think we all have. So trying to get around to the question, which is how do you kind of marry those two, between the internal planning team's score, and that's largely based on the student experience in the classroom, and then the parents who want, that sense of community and the feeder pattern and that stability for their students. And I would ask anyone here on the team tonight if they have thoughts.
Well, if no one jumps in, I guess I get to do that. As we shared with some communities, it's not necessarily a popularity, it's not a volume of emails that comes our way. I think it's the points that people raise, and as I read emails, we have an incredibly smart and passionate community, and we've gotten a lot of very thoughtful comments that, as we read them, and I'm sure the 5 of you are the same way, you're like, oh, I see that. I understand that. And I think as I've gone through this process, my feelings have been shaped on the 8 criteria. When we look at the criteria and how they come together, they all weigh on the decision-making process. I believe that it both eliminated MAP 2 from the conversations, and there were a lot of well thought out, great comments. And Mrs. Rigby, it's not just the things that we get via email or on the survey. It's the conversations people have with us when we're in the community, when we're at events, when we're at ball games. I think all of those things speak to what a great community Dublin is, how everybody is fully invested. And if I step back to look at the steps people are willing to go to stay in their school, for their kids to have continuity, it truly is impressive that this many people are so passionate. At the end of the day, with the help of the 5 of you and the team, we're going to have to make a decision on how we redistrict high schools so that we can balance the enrollment. That has been the charge. And as you mentioned earlier, I accepted that responsibility from the beginning. And as we've gone through the past month, I'm now seeking guidance from you as a board and sharing the guidance that our internal planning team has shared as we chart a path forward. Because I believe this process needs to be driven and guided by more public input and discussion like we're having tonight.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, my next question is, again, along that thought of socioeconomics and changing students based on need in the classroom. I'm just trying to understand what that actually, what that looks like. What will that look like? And will we be doing, you know, 2 out of 3 high schools and making adjustments there? Do you make adjustments to all 3 high schools? What happens to middle school? Do we then go back and try to get some of that balance through middle school realignment? And, you know, and then does it, I don't know, I'm just trying to, I'm trying to work through it in my brain, what it looks like when there's consideration to have socioeconomics as a factor that is potentially changing a map alignment. I just want to know what that looks like.
Well, one of the struggles that I've had over the past couple weeks has been the conversation about the importance of socioeconomics. If it's a conversation that we truly are going to use, and if it becomes an overriding criteria, if it becomes a priority criteria, then I do think we need to pause and we need to look at what does that mean for the middle schools? What does that mean for all 3 high schools? And we need to have a deeper conversation if that is going to be an overriding criteria. The process that we've used, the process that I've led to this point, has been with socioeconomics to not adversely impact the 3 high schools. And my definition of adversely impact would have been a statistically significant change in any of the high school socioeconomic numbers. That's not the same as everybody else's. But for me, looking at it, that's been the role as one of the 8. And as the board, if you would like that weight to be different, all you got to do is tell me. Because in the criteria that are outlined in board policy, as I shared earlier, I think we've hit the board policy with the process that we've used. The 5 of you are my bosses. And if 3 of the 5 of you say to me, hey, stop, socioeconomics needs to be looked at differently, I would do it. It's just a question of that would be a change of course, and that would be different than the process that we've led up until this point.
Okay, thank you.
Deciding which direction I'm going to go in. From a general standpoint, the distance of travel between the 2 blocks that we're talking about with map 1 and map 3 from their current location to Scioto is there a general ballpark within the traffic study, again, that you guys were able to see and assess?
Yes, if one were to look at the traffic study provided by our consultants, and I don't have it right up in front of me, there is a distance in travel time if you were to take Bristol Commons Park and go to Kaufman High School versus Scioto High School. There's a, oh wait, we're going to be able to get it right here. If you were to look at Kaufman High School to Scioto to both Kaufman and Scioto, there's a difference of anywhere between 5-minute travel time in the morning and 8-minute travel time at the peak PM commuter. 4 minutes to Kaufman, 12 minutes to Scioto when you look at the difference in that traffic study. And let me see if I can get this other one quickly. The other area that we would have used, and there are lots of different data points, I'm just picking the ones that I believe are pertinent to the conversation. If you were to look at Llewellyn Farm Park in the traffic study, exact same AM travel time, 10 minutes to both Kaufman and Scioto from Llewellyn Farm Park. In the afternoon, 12 minutes to Kaufman, 14 minutes to Scioto. At PM travel time, 13 minutes to Kaufman and 15 minutes to Scioto. So I think by having the data from this traffic study, it does inform our conversations about the delta, about the difference in travel time based on 17 points in our community that are things when we look at proximity car travel. There's also conversations here that talk about the distance on bikes, the percentage that's path versus sidewalk, the percentage that's lit, and the number of major crossings that would need to have. So all of that's in the traffic study on each of the 17 locations. And when Mrs. Dietrich sends her update to the community in the morning, the links to this traffic study and the data behind the scoring results will be made available to everybody so everybody can see the data that was provided to us by our consultant.
And this is only one, obviously, of the eight factors as we talk about it, but given those two areas being moved, one of those is a walkable, rideable to Kaufman as it currently presents himself, and one of them is theoretically not. Would that be correct?
I think they all have bike paths that can get you, or bike paths or sidewalks that can get you from both of those locations, but it is definitely further from one to the other.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Marshausen, you stated not to worsen socioeconomic balance, and I'm like gathering I think of a question and then somebody else asks a question, then I forget my question. I don't want that to be the main deciding factor. What I would like to see is that if it's part of the 8, that it becomes a piece of the 8, but I don't think that we can fully look at it if we're not thinking about how it stretches any of our buildings. I'm thinking about how many special needs students will we have in a place. I'm thinking of Hopewell. I'm thinking of, how we didn't get it right the first time there. And it feels like if it's going to be one of the 8, that we have to be able to pull that data to be making a sound decision on the students that we're moving to and from.
We legally would not pull special needs data to talk about assignment of students to school. So special needs would be one thing that we educate kids where they are. So to look at the number of students who have special needs would not be a specific criteria we would be able to use in redistricting. But what I will say, Mrs. Gillis, is yes, there are times we've made adjustments because a building was over capacity and wasn't able to meet the needs of the students who were there. One of the things that gives me more confidence in this process, is that we will be phasing this in over 3 to 4 years. As we look at next year's freshmen being the ones assigned to their high schools, and looking at and talking with Mr. Cropper about the percentage of sophomores, juniors, and seniors who are likely to stay at the school that they're currently attending, I do believe that we will have a runway that will allow us to adjust students regardless of the option that we take, that will allow us to make sure we have the staff and the folks that we need at all of our high schools as we go through this, to make sure that we're serving students as we make this transition. You know, next year we're going to open Scioto with the full 60,000 square foot addition, with the knowledge that the only full class will be the freshmen. And then the next year it'll be freshman and sophomore. And as we stair-step this in, it does give us the opportunity that with Mrs. Marple's team and Mr. Andra's team, to ensure that we have the staff and personnel to meet the needs of where our kids are. We are really proud as a district, and we have stepped up as a district to ensure that our staff matches what our students need. And when you look at 16 now very different and diverse elementary schools, the folks sitting around this table ensure that what's needed at each of those elementary schools is provided by us, so that all of those students get a Dublin quality education.
Yep. I'm not sure that you can speak to this, but and if you can't, just state that you can't. But there has been discussion in the community that there has been some ethics issues with speaking to community members, and some communities getting information ahead of time because of you sharing. If you're able to speak to that, which, like I said, that would be, I know you've spoken to legal counsel about that. Are you, if you are?
I will simply say that as the superintendent of the Dublin City Schools, one of my charges is to gather as much information as possible. And I have frequent meetings with community and civic leaders, with other leaders within our community, and the relationships that I've built in 5 years here with some of those key leaders are instrumental in the decision-making process. There are folks who have come and given presentations at meetings with our team about the history of redistricting in the Dublin City Schools. There have been members of our team and members in our community who are active on our Business Advisory Council, on our Senior Citizens Advisory Council, on our key communicators groups, who have been trusted sounding boards to me to provide level-headed feedback. And as someone who is still in my 5th year, relatively new to the community, the historical perspective is important. I will also say that as I talk to folks, there's been people who I share ideas with, but there hasn't been anyone who has had, in the past month, any significant influence on changes to what our team has been. I will also say that there is inaccurate information that has been shared. There are false messages that have been attributed to people, and they are inaccurate, and people are sharing inaccurate information. I think it's important that information's verified, that we have conversations, but in terms of my role and my engagement with folks in the community, any community leader seeks input and seeks guidance and has trusted folks that they bounce ideas off of. And that's what I have done, and that's what I will continue to do.
I want to talk about the traffic studies, and can you just explain the routes that were taken during, do you still have it? During the traffic studies? But also, can you explain if there was consideration of the traffic impact at Sawmill and Hard.
I do not believe there were specific conversations about the traffic at Sawmill and Hart as a result of this. And there is routing information that is also available for each of those routes. The maps that were used and the routes that were used can be provided in addition with the map.
No, you can go ahead. I'll just wait my turn.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand if I think I heard you say that map 2 is not really viable. Is that correct?
I would like to take map 2 off the table.
Okay, so can you please just explain the process? If map 2 comes off the table, what does it look like from this evening through October 29th for community input, for IPT meetings, for the consideration of the criteria as they are, or anything different to the numbers that were up there before? What can you just give an idea of what these next couple weeks look like?
First, if any of the board members have objection to socioeconomic status being just one of the 8 considerations in having equal weight, I would like to have that conversation. If any of you strongly feel that socioeconomic should have a higher consideration than one of the 8, as Mrs. Dietrich said in her statements, I think we need to clarify the role of SES in this role. Secondly, once we have that clarity, as a group, we will work with Mr. Cropper to look at those 2 maps, map 1 and map 3, and as we look at those scores, are there tweaks and changes to either of those maps that bring them closer to getting higher scores? Do we look at those maps and say, and let's just look at an example, balanced school facility utilization, map 1 is in 3rd place, and it received those points in when we look at the balanced school facility utilization. Are there tweaks to map 1 that would improve the concerns with facility utilization? The same way, where map 3 and busing efficiencies and transportation efficiencies there, are there changes that we could make to map 3 that would improve the score for map 3? We are working and we are growing, and we said this is a journey. We said these aren't final. So can we improve these maps to where either after internal planning team meeting on the 27th, where we would look at different iterations of these maps, potentially score them, have conversations internally along their way, and then on the 29th, are we able to come to you as a board with one map that we feel, hey, with the changes we've made, this map is scoring 900 out of 1,200 possible points. It has at least 3/4, 75% of the criteria we're hitting. Can we get to that point and bring that to you as a board? Can we get to where we addressed some of the concerns that we all had? You know, I think Mrs. Gillis brought up the point. Are these maps good enough that we would go through this now? No. So can we make them better, and can we get one to be the best possible option for us moving forward as a community? And for our community, what's their role in this? As they're listening to this conversation tonight, what are your thoughts on the two maps? We've got really smart people who I'm sure we will hear from them. And when you live in a community with this many people and this many ideas, knowing that we read this and Cropper analyzes the information sent to him, you know, I think it would be great if by the 24th, we're able to say in the next 11 days, we got another 3,000 comments, and they're comments that helped us shape the revisions to these two maps. That's what I would hope, Mrs. Rigby, we could get to.
Okay, so at the start of your comments, you made a comment about the board's desires as a result of this meeting tonight. So I'm just trying to figure out, are you going to ask? Do you want us to state our desires about where?
Well, I think we're still in the question phase.
Okay.
My goal when we were done is there anyone on the board who has an objection or a strong feeling that's different than socioeconomics being one of the 8 criteria? And if so, how do you think we should consider it, and what does that look like going forward? That's, you guys get to ask me all these questions now. My thought was at the end I'd get to ask you a couple.
It's your turn. But I just want to, can I just interject? This graph is like hurting my head. Do we not have like some numbers and
you will.
You know.
You'll get all the numbers in a chart tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
You got them all, with standard deviations and all the fun statistical stuff that goes with it.
So I'm trying to formulate the question as I go here. Dublin looks much different than it did when I was probably 4 or 5 years old, growing up in Misty Meadows, to now where it is now as a 41-year-old, with a bunch of kids in school. I think that if we all had an honest assessment of looking at these maps, map 1 very clearly would maintain in some form or another what traditionally has occurred within the community. And so I'm going to ask a question before I go into my next statement, and that is, would you agree with that, Dr. Marshouse?
I think from a visual standpoint, if an outsider were to look at the 3 maps, map 1 is the map that looks the simplest in how those boundaries were drawn. That's just if you look at the maps, it looks the simplest in that point. Mr. Valentine, at one point everybody went to the school across the street. Those historical patterns are very different back to when there was only one Dublin High School. And I had the opportunity to see and look at all the different iterations of high school attendance zones here in Dublin. And it was very different when there were areas like where you used to live that were not very dense and everybody was on 5 to 10 acres. So yeah, you're right, it's changed a lot.
So where I'm going with that is, I think we're very clearly at a crossroads right now as a district, and we can say socioeconomics isn't a part of the driving factor of some of these other maps with the way that they look, but I think an honest assessment is that it is a part of that discussion, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. I think as board members with the 5 of us sitting here, I mean, I even had, unbeknownst to her, Lynn May gave me a call this week, former board member who had kids go through all 3 high schools, and I think that we've all had conversations, we've all had emails that have taken place over the past three weeks, however long it's been now. And I think that there's, without a doubt, a soft spot and a concern for some of the issues that we've heard about that maybe some of our more challenging buildings have. But as we take a step back and have this conversation and what our direction was to you, this is a part of the problem that I have right now. I think that we have, on one end, and I'll be the first to say it and throw it on video, I'm a part of 2 or 3. Amy's a part of 2 or 3, like in terms of where we live. And so this makes it very difficult. I've got plenty of friends that are within map 1, and that becomes very challenging. But ultimately, we did not we gave you direction to lead this process, but we didn't give you clear direction in terms of what I would consider a massive overhaul to what history or tradition has been within the community. And that doesn't mean necessarily that's subjective. It could be right or wrong depending upon who you talk to, but we did not do that. And I appreciate that you've taken ownership for some of the mistakes, as you noted here tonight. But I think that as a board, as we continue to have this discussion, that we really need to be very, and I think we are being, just to be clear, conscientious of the crossroads that we're at. And if the decision that we're going to go down is in some form or another putting a heavy weight to socioeconomics and balancing this out, I will be the last person in favor of pausing this process in any form or fashion. But I think that there is a much bigger discussion that needs to be had, and whether or not that's done in a short time frame or a longer time frame, we need to take a step back and have that honest conversation and assess where we are. Again, I'm not, in no way is that a negative towards any part of our community, any part of our school buildings. But right now, I think that it is, I don't think that we're being honest with our approach to this whole thing if we don't directly acknowledge that. And I'm hopeful that as we continue this discussion this evening, that whether or not we tell you go back and take a look at these two maps and figure out how they're more efficient or whatever the case may be, or if we collectively as a group say, you know what, there's a bigger discussion to be had, and there's a change of direction for the school district, change of direction from what was previously done, then that's another conversation. But to not call it the elephant in the room at this point, I think is doing everybody a disservice. So it's more of a comment than a question.
I feel like I have more of a comment than a question. I feel like this entire process is one of missed opportunities. If I think about what's been happening over the last few weeks, or even just the questions around the room tonight, it makes me question, why did we not treat this process like purchasing Cardinal Health Building, where we had focus groups? Because it seems that we're sitting here talking about specifically socioeconomics, and I will continue to say I want it to be one of the 8 and not the number 1, because it feels like if we have a misalignment in the thought, that it starts at community level, and if we were able to bounce these things off in an earlier manner, we would have been able to set the arrow in the point of, okay, everybody, this is where we are, this is what we're learned, this is the direction we're going. And because we did not do that, we're now here going, what's more important? Here are the 8 points. Here's this really loud thing over here. Here's loud over. It just feels like we're kind of like throwing darts in the dark at this point, trying to determine who thinks what is more important. I still think we have to honor our 8 points. And I feel like the more I say that, Dr. Marshausen, you're saying, well, if we want that to be the only one, I'm not asking for it to be the number 1. I am asking for it to be honored because it's on there. I think I can't say any of that without going, okay, if we go back and we try to get higher than 719 points out of 1,200 to rate these maps, we have, as my inbox tells me all day long, lost trust and confidence with not everyone in our community, because we have over 17,000 students, but with pockets, with areas, with people that have taken the time to let us know. How do we go to the drawing board and say, we want to get closer, please trust us? All of this is floating here. So all of that's a statement. I don't even know that I'm asking a question. But I think we can't leave here today without some kind of guidance on the people that have elected us, the people who have put everybody in this room. How do we ask that we're going to get somewhere different? And nobody's going to like every map. That's just not possible. But
Lindsay, I've got your question, because that was my next
Thank you,
question.
Mrs. Messick.
Dr. Marshausen, what steps will you take through the rest of the process to restore trust of the community, of the school board, in the rest of the process, and ultimately the outcome of the map?
Mrs. Messick, as my friend and mentor Tim Kite told me, trust is easily lost and takes a long time to gain back. And what I say won't matter, but what we do will matter. What we do as a board, what we do as a team. And during the process moving forward, and really going back to the 29th, I think it is critical that this process, although the responsibility falls on my shoulders, that it involves all of us as a leadership team, so that the community knows it isn't just John making a decision, that in the public conversations, the community hears the discussions and debates we're having tonight, so that the community has trust that I am listening to our elected leaders and that I'm being held accountable by our elected leaders to the process that we've discussed. I think that's the first step. And I think open, honest conversations like we're having tonight, where folks can watch and see what we're discussing and why we're discussing it, how we're having conversations about difficult issues, is a critical step to rebuilding trust. You know, I think back to, and it started with Mr. Valentine and myself, and then there are 4 of us who are sitting here. When we left a board meeting in 2022 with making decisions about masks, there were lots of questions whether we'd earn back community trust and what happened during the COVID process. And about 16, 17 months later, we were able to pass an operating and building levy in 2023 because our actions allowed us to build back trust. Do I believe we can build back trust by open, honest communication, by having people see the hard work that we do and the difficult conversations that we enter into? 100% we can earn back their trust. But I don't think it's by what I say tonight. I think it's by what we do over the next month, 2 months, 6 months, years, that builds back trust once trust has been broken.
My question is, what do you mean by an overriding criteria? Because in my mind, throughout this process, I haven't thought of socioeconomic status as an overriding criteria, but one to be considered. But also just based on policy, just examining the potential impact of any map on a building. So I guess another follow-up question is just how are we looking at this in a way that we would need to recreate the criteria? Like, what is it that's being proposed that doesn't fit in this criteria, I guess is my question.
Well, I think Mr. Valentine brought this up to some extent. If the goal is to provide greater balance in our socioeconomic status at our high schools, if that were an overriding criteria, I think we would need to look at all 3 high schools. I think we would need to, as a board and as a leadership team, right now we've said not adversely affect. So when I look at something and one map has 48% and one map has 50%, it's 2%, it's within a standard of error. So, but I think if we were going to say this is an overriding criteria, we would need to look at our specific numbers, and I would ask that we set targets based on what we wanted the socioeconomic status to be at each of the buildings. And I think we would need to have more specific targets if we were going to make something an overriding criteria.
I think you can have concern about adding that 1% to Scioto and also making it the largest high school? And also making it the largest high school without totally redrawing the entire district. I don't personally think that there's anything wrong with the balance that is in Scioto currently, but I would not want to inadvertently cause harm to Scioto. And I think that's different than, you know, totally redrawing the whole district.
Diane, do you mind if I jump in ahead of you, because my question relates to that? How much, as we've modeled this out, and we've gotten this question from folks, and I don't think the general public completely knows this, the old Sawmill Athletic Club is obviously now turned into apartments. Columbus Zone area has the potential to bring a lot of housing into the district, depending upon what goes on development-wise in the Sawmill Bethel corridor. How much is that incorporated into our planning here? And there's a great level of unpredictability to that we all know, because I don't think that we would have ever guessed that it'd be at that point, or those opportunities would necessarily be there. And obviously that also could change pending legislative action and so forth. So how much has that been incorporated into this planning? And just to go off of what Mrs. De Silva just said, it clearly could have some really serious consequences in terms of both numbers as well as other challenges that may feed into, if it's naturally going to go into Scioto, if that area is assigned to what would already be there.
There are a number of unpredictable factors, and I and our team wish we could say this is a 10-year map, no questions asked. We can't. Our enrollment projections are based on Wolpert's analysis and the enrollment projections they provided us. My sense of calm at some level comes from the fact that it takes a long time for those things to happen. But yes, there is potential that there are commercial spaces along the Sawmill corridor that could be at some point leveled, and they could become multi-story, multi-family housing. And over time, there may have to be changes, Mr. Valentine, because of that. I believe you and I have sat in meetings with city officials where they've revealed plans for Metro Place and the revitalization of Metro Place and what could come in that area. I have great faith that our city leaders in the city of Dublin know what they're doing, and we've had talks, and they're like, it's going to be like Bridge Park. It's not going to be family driven. And they've done a great job making it so Bridge Park doesn't generate hundreds of kids for us. I have confidence the city of Dublin can do that again, but we have to be mindful of that. When we look at available green space in Jerome Village, and I believe Trustee Davis mentioned that consent decree and Nationwide Realty's ability to continue within their acreage to pretty much do what they want in Jerome Village. We have to be mindful. We don't have as much green space as our friends in Olentangy do, but there is still available green space up there. And again, we need to be mindful. We could see more growth than anticipated in our northwest quadrant. And what does that mean? In any of these maps, I think we can be fairly certain and have a high degree of confidence in the first 4 or 5 years, but we also have to be mindful that things could change down the road, and we may have to make other changes, and we wish we didn't. You know, it's been, since 2006 since we did this the last time in Dublin, and I think we've learned from the process why. But I don't think there's any way we can say it's going to be another 20 years before we have to do it again. We'll likely have to do it again before that.
So knowing, or hearing what you said, and knowing that our 2 pockets of growth are obviously the Sawmill Bethel corridor predominantly as a potential, and then the northwest part, as you guys have laid this out, have you used, with Kaufman somewhat being at the center, have you used Kaufman at a lower capacity in order to provide wiggle room? Can you elaborate as to the strategy behind that?
100%. And working with Matt Cropper and Cropper GIS, who has done this for decades, one of the reasons Kaufman does have lower utilization is it provides that flexibility in the future. You could shift some additional Jerome students to Kaufman, potentially in spot redistricting in the future. You could potentially shift some Scioto students to Kaufman, potentially in spot redistricting, without having to engage in a process that's this detailed. Mr. Valentine, you and I were both involved in a situation where a certain neighborhood in Jerome Village had to be spot redistricted back from Depp to Penny, and it had a lot of emotion that came with it. But that's different than doing this. So I think Mrs. Gillis referenced some changes that we made at Hopewell in the post-COVID era, and shifts in enrollment we did there to better meet the needs of students. Those types of changes don't engender the level of emotion that a full-scale, large community with 17,000 students does when you redistrict high schools.
My last part is just more of a statement, and that is, I obviously had the opportunity to meet with you on that Thursday prior to the 22nd meeting, which wasn't purposeful in any way, just to get that out there. I was in for a safety and security meeting. I asked, we all have other lives outside of what we're doing here. I think a lot of people think this is our full-time job and that we actually are salaried and doing this all the time. And I'm sure Mrs. Rigby is working, I don't know how many hours right now on this at pennies on the dollar. But I had the opportunity to see multiple maps. Within those maps, there were other maps that showed an ability to hand current and future enrollment projections in different ways. And so I guess my comment is, as we look at potentially 1 and 3, 1 or 3, and you go back to the internal planning committee, I would be interested in maps that take into account the unpredictability of the growth in each of those areas and are essentially have low, moderate, high risk in terms of if we moved less kids out of Kaufman, whether or not it's from South Part or I'm going to call it Central Part, and what that would look like based off of the potential of the growth on either end of the district.
Yes, Mr. Valentine, on Thursday the 18th, we had the opportunity to meet, and if I had met with other board members previous to the meeting on the 22nd, which if I could go back, I would meet with all of you previous to that meeting on the 22nd. There are maps that do address some of the facility utilization challenges with map 1 that we have looked at, and you and I talked about some of those maps, and I am sure that those will be maps that will be considered as we go back and look as an internal planning team at some of the options moving forward.
Question, follow up on my previous question. So you know that the free and reduced lunch metric isn't a perfect metric for measuring SES, but it is what we have. Is there an effort to better measure that? Because the reason I ask is because we know that we have a lot of lunch debt, as you brought up a couple of meetings ago. And I know there is a significant amount at Scioto, which would suggest to me that there might be some need that isn't captured in that free and reduced lunch metric.
At this point, we have used that free and reduced lunch metric as the consistent measure that we've looked at for socioeconomic status across the different maps. We have not looked at creating other metrics or looking at other data at this point.
Is that something that the internal planning team might look at, or just so that we know if we really are increasing that or not? Like, what is actually happening?
I think we can look at lunch debt to see where those numbers are. Yeah, that's one measure. Other measures are more difficult to get to and would take a significant more amount of time.
If you are going to go back and look at socioeconomic status, we need to make sure that this is not just performative, that we're not just moving kids around for numbers, but we're doing it for a reason, and that ultimately it improves the student well-being, it improves the student education, and ultimately their lifestyle through high school. And that's something that I'm not sure numbers can adequately tell us. So I don't know if there's studies done that we would also have to look at to see how this would impact the student daily life. I, as well, want socioeconomic status to be a factor, like Mrs. Gillis said, and not an overriding factor. But when we look at it, we have to look at it from the lens of education and what it actually does to the student body, as well as making sure that if there are gaps between the schools, that might not be something that can just be overcome through moving students, that we might need to actually make changes to how we do things. And I know I've talked to you, Dr. Marshausen, about having an ISPTO. So would you care to discuss how some other ways to look at socioeconomic status? So it is not just performative. So we're not just moving students, but we're actually changing lives.
Mrs. Messick, over the past several years, and you've been a part of some of this, and some of this was before your tenure on the board, we have really worked to take what can be raised for fundraising and what's done at our school buildings to make sure that students have similar experiences. Prior to 2023, PTOs would raise money, and the playgrounds at our buildings were determined by how much their PTOs could raise. As part of the 2023 levy, the district committed to funding playground renovations and playground upgrades using district funds. So it came off the PTO's budget. So the PTO that could raise $20,000 at a dance-a-thon, when another PTO had a hard time raising $3,000, that was eliminated as an option. When it came to the boosters at Jerome High School being able to raise the money to put in a batting facility at Jerome by funds that were raised as part of the 2023 levy as a community, we committed, and we've now put the multi-use facilities at both Kaufman and Scioto. And as part of that, we were able to turf those fields too, when at one point, and Mr. Valentine and I were in a meeting where we were looking at Jerome turfing parts of their baseball field with booster funds. I come from a district where we had an inter-school PTO that allowed for sharing of funds and allowed for all of our PTOs to work together. I think that's a wonderful idea. I also see how our music boosters operate as an umbrella organization across all of our schools, and I would love to see find a way for our athletic boosters to come together so that we were able to work together as a community to ensure that all of our young athletes had those same opportunities, and it wasn't just who could raise the same funds. When we look at experiences and when we look at a community that is as passionate and has the resources that we have in Dublin, I believe this is all achievable, and I believe this is something that, regardless of the outcome of some of these conversations, that are things that are on my radar, as we've demonstrated over the past several years, to make sure that our facilities and our opportunities at those schools are balanced.
Before Mr. Valentine jumped on my spot and asked questions, I had one which was along what he's asking, but it's more so we have our 8 criteria, and I know you've said multiple times this is not a process we want to be revisiting anytime soon. I don't think any of us does. And so we're looking for longevity out of a MAP situation, a MAP scenario. So, you know, if we go forward from tonight and we have 2 possible maps, I'm not asking, you know, to put you on the spot, but I would just ask that continued consideration be given to what is this district going to look like in 5 or 10 years. I realize we don't have a crystal ball, but we have land that the district has purchased in the northwest quadrant. So what does that look like? What kind of utilization do we get from that? And then how does that shift or change feeder patterns so that it makes sense for the district?
One of the things I've talked about in a couple meetings is I believe as we continue to grow, our next build is likely elementary 17 and middle school 6. And I think all of our high school administrators, I know our ADs, I know our music friends would love if we could have 3 middle schools that had 100% feeder patterns to each of the high schools. And if we had 6 middle schools and we had 2 middle schools that fed each high school, now the feeder patterns are all 10 out of 10. And I think when we look at that land in the northwest quadrant and we look at where growth is potentially happening, I think that there is a future consideration for where would you put middle school 6 and how does that all put together. It is something that is in the back of my mind. I know I've had that conversation with several of you as board members during our one-on-one meetings and about what does it look like with direct feeder patterns to high schools. I just think it's something that is a consideration in the back of my mind. It's not a driving consideration, but when you look at future growth, it's one of the things that we consider. I would love to get to a point where we were able to look at the whole pie at the same time. I would love if we could get to where elementaries were not split between when they went from elementary to middle, and middles weren't split when they went from middle to high. I think that is a goal in the long run that is achievable for this district, but it's going to take ongoing planning and conversations such as this.
Just going back to the question I asked previously, as a piggyback to that, when we were looking at utilization, were we looking at 5-year or 10-year projection?
I think we look at both. There's 0 to 5.
Well, I should say is it
okay. So when we look here, there are 2 different things. Balanced school facility utilization is current, kind of 0 to 4, 0 to 5, and then the account for future growth would be the 5 to 10.
Okay.
So those 2 things are in 2 different areas here, and they're looked at in those 2 places.
And to what level of detail as we get information tomorrow or the public gets information tomorrow, I guess, is that going to be included as we...
Well, I think you'll see the scores on both of those, and one of the reasons that I had our team go around and kind of define how we looked at those, and was so that everyone can know that's kind of how we were looking at those. And then Mrs. Dietrich, kind of as you said, hit the elephant in the room, which is from this scoring standpoint, the economic diversity is 1/8. It is an equal weight to the others as you go through this process. So using this scoring, and it uses the free and reduced lunch number, it is an equal weight in that total overall score.
Okay.
Of course.
I was asking Tiffany.
Oh.
Oh, it's Lindsay's turn.
I think I skipped my turn. It's okay.
Okay. With the socioeconomic status, and I know you said that you can't use students on IEPs, are we able to have EL data and what that would do to the changes in the schools as well? Simply because that need is great. But I do want to be clear, and this is not to you, Dr. John, but to the community. We already service our students in an equitable manner, not based on equality at the high schools, meaning that currently, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we have 1 EL teacher at Jerome and 7 at Scioto. So we already service our students in an equitable manner. But is there possibilities to get other student data to know just how it's going to change the makeup of that student body as we prepare for teachers, et cetera?
Just for clarity with the public, we have half of an EL teacher at Jerome and 5 EL teachers at Scioto.
Thank you.
She is a whole person.
Yes, she works
she's only
full-time
there
and splits
half
her
the
time. Thanks for that clarification.
Mrs. Messick, I will tell you that it's things that we're looking at as a team, but I don't believe it can be a factor as we look at how do we redistribute students. So it's something we, of course, have to be mindful of, and we will, of course, respond to with however the student population is redistributed, but I don't think, well, I know we wouldn't make redistricting decisions based on it's going to put too many EL kids here, because I think that falls into a different class that we wouldn't want to separate because of. Chris, you want to say something?
I do. Mrs. Messick and I'm going to use an elementary example, just because this really fits everywhere in all the pockets that we've been talking about. But when I think about special education at elementary, when we have too few students with disabilities in a building, it creates an issue for us. For example, at an elementary, if I've got a low number of students, I might have an intervention specialist who needs to serve kids in 4 or 5 grade levels. And that's a problem. Too few makes a struggle. When we have too many students at a particular grade level, that also creates an issue. If we have 6 students with disabilities at grades 3, 4, and 5, that's 18 total. And IS can only serve 16 kids on their caseload. That creates an issue for differentiation in our classrooms and for caseloads. So too few is a struggle. Too many is a struggle. And I think about that quote, everything in moderation and nothing in excess. And so it doesn't really matter. We're talking about kids, and that changes over time. But even perfect numbers sometimes create challenges, and that's why we're here. We have a really difficult job to make tough decisions for individual kids, and that number changes over time. So it's hard. Too few, too many.
I'd like
Thank
to
you
jump
so
in.
much.
I'd like to jump in too, Mrs. Messick, with the difficulty in identifying demographics. I just want to remind our community that current freshmen, sophomores, and juniors would have the choice to stay, and we don't know how many of them would. So that would change those numbers. We also, for EL, special education, 504s, those can be identified at any time. So it would be, the numbers would be accurate only in the moment that we pushed calculate, and then they would be obsolete about 2 minutes later. So I just want that to be said for our public.
I'm going to ask 2 questions this time, but it might really be like 4 or 5, but they're related. So looking at the enrollment projections, can you talk about the enrollment projections and what it's based on? Is it the low, moderate, which projection level that we're looking at? And then also, how does the current district enrollment compare to that? And then the other part of my question, and I know you're not going to know this, but I want to ask it anyway.
I love it when you say, I'm going to ask you a question that you don't know the answer to.
Yes, I just want to be thinking about, like, how many of the students that are in the student impact estimates are actual students who are definitely going to be moved. So like the 5 through 8 kids, not the older kids.
Okay, so I'm going to try this 2 ways. We work with Wolpert. Wolpert updates those numbers annually. And there are years they're spot on as Mr. Kern's forecasts are every year, within, less than a percentage different. There are years that they've been off by 4 to 5 to 8%. That all depends on how fast things happen, when things grow, and when neighborhoods gray. And every year further out in the forecast, it becomes less accurate. So the numbers that we're looking for next year, we're pretty confident those are going to be fairly accurate. There are kiddos, and they're here. As you look further down, who moves in, who moves out, they become less and less accurate each year in a 10-year projection. Right now, we're using our moderate numbers because they'll tell us high and low. High makes us really nervous. Low's like, where are they all going to go? So, you know, the recommended or the moderate numbers are clearly the ones that we are using in this process. And to your other question, I don't know the specific, but I'll use the same methodology. The current 5th through 8th grade classes are less accurate when you're looking at the 5th graders being sophomores 5 years down the road. So we're using numbers that are what Wolpert has used. We're confident. We've used them to build buildings before and expend taxpayer dollars. So we're as confident as we can be in those numbers when we look at the projections that we're having down the road.
This goes a little bit off from my train of thought lately, but why did we not do traffic studies ahead of the 3 maps that were brought to the public?
Economically, doing a traffic study on 3 is more economical than doing a traffic study on 11.
And this is probably going to pain Brian, probably pain all of us, but how much did the traffic study for 3?
$23,000.
Okay. To date, I'll let Lindsay go as I formulate my next question.
I just wanted to touch on, we had talked, feels like a couple times about historically what our district has done, and I'm just wondering if we historically have looked at Scioto's previous boundaries and the 90s and early 2000s and why we didn't, I'm making an assumption, why we didn't use that as kind of like a starting place. Because if I think about some of our neighborhoods current have gone, not all of them, but there are pockets in our community that have been Dublin High School and have gone to Kaufman and have gone nowhere else. And so we're going to hit historically. I'm just wondering, did we look at that? And if not, why not?
Well, I think when you look at some of the neighborhoods that when we had 2 high schools were original Scioto neighborhoods, once you got through the process, a lot of them will fall into places that it would split middle schools multiple ways. We've added middle schools along the same time that we've added high schools. And I think when you start looking at, when you add Eversole, what does that do to the splits between Grizel and Carr? So a lot of those neighborhoods, Mrs. Gillis, that may have at one point been Scioto historically, things have just changed so much that where they had gone before, there have been so many other changes along those lines.
A point of clarity, the data checkers watching via live stream have made me aware we've got 4 elementary schools that currently split into 2 high schools, Bailey being included amongst one of them. This move with MAP 3 in its current form would make Bailey the only elementary school to split into 3 high schools. And I think that's something that the internal planning committee should note as we map out, and I expect Scott Gill to fact check my facts.
We will definitely fact check your facts.
Can you say the first part of that again?
Yeah, 4 elementary schools that currently split into 2 high schools in the long run. And the second part of what I said was, and Bailey is one of those in its current form. With MAP 3, Bailey would be the lone elementary school to split into 3 high schools in the long run. Which goes back to my point of, if we're going to make a change I think that there's a wholesale change that needs to be made, and I think we need to be prepared for that discussion.
Oh, my last question, I think it's my last question, is you listed transportation efficiency as a strength for MAP 1 and a strength and a weakness for MAP 3. Can you comment on that?
I didn't, the community did. When we look at that slide, it was interesting as Cassie went through, and Cassie, can you get back to that slide for a second? This is from the community feedback that Cropper combined for the first 3,000 folks who went through this. So I think we all can know how it got to be both a strength and a weakness based on the people who were filling out the surveys. But it was pretty equal in terms of community feedback that some people saw it as a strength and some people saw it as a weakness.
I have a question if you're finished with that.
I think you're the last one left, Mrs.
Okay,
De Silva.
so looking at transportation between the middle schools and the high schools, so did we consider transporting students for world languages and math classes, you know, if they take an advanced math class, from one building to the other?
It was not a specific consideration until we started to look at the public concept map. When we looked at the concept map, and I believe it may have been Mrs. Messick, one of you brought that up to our attention, that if you were to take Eversole students to Scioto, how would those students, when they take the world languages in the high school classes, be considered? It was not something that we really dove deeply into for maps 1 and 3, but we will have those numbers for you if this is a path that we're okay moving forward with.
Yeah, I think it was me, but I was just
Okay.
curious about the other ones. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious.
For those in the community who don't have kids at this point yet, if you have a middle school student who takes a world language, we bus them to the high school that they would attend to take the language if there's not enough mass at that high school to offer the class. So we have high school kids who bump around.
And just for clarity, not necessarily. Some of those courses are offered at the middle school. Some of them are at the high school, and it will again be hard to give you accurate information because those students haven't signed up for that class yet if they're sitting in 7th grade. So we're not quite sure. Lori, anything I missed there?
And they vary greatly from year to year. And I would also tell you that how we've transported kids over the years has varied. We've used multiple different models of that, and it hasn't always been feeder pattern over the years. It is currently, though.
So a child might take a world language class at a different high school than they are projected to attend. So we figure it out.
Gotcha.
Based on who signs up for what languages where.
And number of buses available.
And number of buses
coming
available.
from different middle
and
schools
number of
to high
drivers
schools.
that were short.
It's a very complex puzzle.
Is it my turn, or does?
I don't know. I just have questions around, like, so we've talked about the overriding. Is it going to be an overriding criteria? You know, pausing on the situation, and just there's a lot of unknowns still floating around. So I would like more information on what all that means and what would the process look like if we're. I mean, no one here has said that they wanted it to be an overriding criteria. So,
And that was going to be my question. Do any of you feel it should be an overriding criteria? No. And if the internal planning team were to continue with it being 1 of 8 and look at those maps, and we come back to you on the 29th, are you okay? And with us doing that, and my next question would be, Mrs. De Silva, if there's specific information you would like us to have when we do that, by all means, I would welcome that, and we would do our best to be able to have that to share with the board in advance of that meeting on that day, but then to address those concerns at that meeting.
And I guess I also just want to make sure that I'm clear on what the internal planning team's opinion is on this. So are they suggesting that it should be weighted differently? Because my understanding is in this round, in the way that these are scored, that it is, like you said, 1 of 8. It's an 8th weighted the way everything else is. So was there a push to change it? Is that, I guess I want to be clear on what is driving the question.
Mrs. Silva, I guess I want to piggyback off of that and say it feels like when you're asking that question, Dr. Marchand, I feel like you're saying if you're giving us, for us to give you the go-ahead and like, if we're not going to make it overriding, it almost feels like, is it just not one of the 8? Like, I'm a little bit confused because it's like I'm not asking for it to be overriding. I'm just asking it to be one of the 8.
And I'm saying with your permission, it will be one of the 8.
But was it not one of the 8?
No, it is one of the 8. On those scores there, as represented on this scoring result.
So then what changes in the I guess I'm a little cloudy on now what changes for us to go back and cut these maps to get more points to better the process?
It goes back to the discussion we're having. If we're going to change what has traditionally been done.
But I'm not asking for that.
I know, but if we are going to, if you're looking at 2 or 3, it does change that. And then it gets into the socioeconomic discussion, whether or not we want it to or not. I don't mean to jump in front of you here, John, but it does. No matter what, it does. And if we're going to have that be the path, it gets into the, why aren't we doing it with all 3 high schools? Why didn't we do it with the middle schools?
Then how did we get map? Like, how is that even how are we here? How do we have that map if it goes against everything we are?
Yeah, can you say more about what you mean by what we have traditionally done?
From a feeder system standpoint within the district, as schools have continued to feed into one another from elementary to middle school to high school. That's what I mean.
Well, okay, but you're saying because we would be splitting, can you say more about that?
Yeah. We have traditionally had schools that have filled each of our, whether or not it's elementary to middle school or middle school to high school. And obviously that's evolved as the district has grown, developed, and changed. But if you look at the maps, and again, I feel like I'm going off of what Cassie said earlier and going to say the elephant in the room. Like, if you're looking at it, map 1 is the most continuous of what we have done in the past. 2 and 3 is not. And so what I'm saying is, if that is the case, and that can be the case, I think that the question then becomes, in the community, especially the community that would be changed by a part of this, has a very reasonable ask, and that is, why just us and not the entire district? Because you're effectively asking people, and we're, again, I'll say it, we're a part of the community that would be changed in 2 and 3. And I have zero problem with my kids going to Dublin Scioto High School. Absolutely zero. But there are questions that need to be asked when you get to the point of driving literally by Kaufman to get to Scioto, or bypassing the opportunity to walk, run, or ride your bike, which many of those kids do, whether maybe not necessarily for school all the time, but without a doubt for practices. And that's something that is a change.
Right.
And maybe it's a change that we need to do, but I think that it's relevant to the discussion.
But then I think we're only thinking about that change for one neighborhood, because if I live in Llewellyn Farms, which I do not, then their emails tell me, their parents who've called me have said, my kid rides their bike up France Road. I don't know, I've been sent maps, it's a whole thing. So we're saying historically they've stayed in one place, right? We're looking at a map that moves them. So in my opinion, when you're saying that, I'm thinking so-and-so's neighborhood matters more, that they can walk and bike ride, more than the historic situation that we've always had and we've never touched this area.
I'm not saying that it matters more. What I'm saying is that if we are going to look at what the community feedback has been, look at what has traditionally been done, and we are going to make a change to that, that change, in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion, needs to be bigger than just a couple of different pockets within our community. I think that we owe it to the community at that point to have a much bigger discussion. And it isn't just 2 high schools, it's 3 high schools, and it goes down to the middle school level. And that's what I think that we as a district, we as the leadership team here, need to be willing to discuss. Because it is, look out at the audience and like, think about your daughter having gone to, I'm not gonna say school, gone to a school that got split into 3 different high schools, and they're the only one in the district. There's a very relevant argument for folks in the southern part of the district as to why they feel they should maintain and continue to go to Kaufman. But if we are going to have that discussion, I think that we owe it to the community to have a much bigger discussion than what we are currently doing.
Dr. Marshausen, can you speak to some of the limitations of the feeder patterns and, I guess, start there?
Well, I think one of the things I want to clarify, the internal planning team on these scoring results scored them all based on each criteria being weighted equally. We went through and we looked at balanced school utilization on a Likert scale. We talked about it. Everyone filled out a tally sheet. We put our scores in together. So this scoring is the result of individually tallied scores for each of these, and they're all weighted the same on this map, on this scoring result sheet. Mrs. De Silva, when we talk about those feeder patterns, and Mr. Cropper talks about this very eloquently, our ultimate goal would be to either not split elementary school, not split middle schools, or to get them as close to 50-50 splits as possible. That keeps the most number of students, the biggest cohort of students together. As Mr. Valentine has pointed out, there's apparently a neighborhood that their elementary would potentially go to all 3 high schools as we go through this, because they would go to 2 middle schools, and one of those middle schools would be split, which would be involving the same students. When we look at feeder patterns, it's really that cohort model where you try to keep as many kids together as possible. The cleanest feeder pattern we have now, and I think it shows in the school pride in that feeder pattern, and you've had the opportunity to experience it, is Davis to Scioto. They're both the Irish. There's pride. They stick together. I think when you can get those feeder patterns as aligned as possible, it does have a balance and a benefit for the students to stay together.
Okay. Can you, and it doesn't have to be today. Again, I like to ask questions that you're not going to have answers to, but
I've done pretty well, though.
Can you get us information on, I mean, we've gotten lots of emails, hundreds of emails from people with different variations of splits, and some are for and against going to, even people in the same neighborhood are for and against going to certain schools. So it's a lot to, it's a lot to consider. Do you have, I guess, going to Chris's point before about the fact checking on, what these elementary, different splits and how consistent or not consistent they are, and if there are outliers that are being split more than the rest?
What I will tell the board that I will have to you is I will have you a chart that demonstrates where the elementaries go to middle school now and then where those high schools go now. So you'll be able to see the current splits from elementary to middle, then middle to high. I will also get you a split for the 2 maps that would still be under consideration. So you could see in those 2 maps where elementary students go to middle and high and how many times they're split. So you would see feeder pattern. We will create for you a graphic that shows the flow for students, elementary, middle, and high.
Is there a way to check to see if there are small pockets that are, beyond the splits, than like a small pocket that is more affected than the other? Again.
Do you have a specific example?
No,
okay.
not really.
I think what she's trying to say is like if you've got an elementary school and only 10% go to one middle school, and then that 10% gets split up again. Is that what you're trying to?
Kind of.
That would be good information to have.
We'll do our best to find out if there are. I don't believe we have any elementaries that are only 10% that get split, but we will look at elementary splits to middle, and then we will follow those middle school splits to high to see if there are any pockets that are adversely affected by multiple splits.
Yeah, and I know, again, like looking at this, there's no way to please everybody. I just want to know if there's like an outlier situation that might be disproportionately affecting a small group.
I just want to add to what I said previously. Outside of the central/Bailey area, we also, with MAP 3, as you guys, I don't know what direction we're ultimately going to be providing here as a board or how you're walking away this evening, but we have a chunk of neighborhoods off of Brand Road that literally will pull out on Brand Road and arguably are closer to, easily, I would say, closer to Jerome than any
Their
neighborhoods are to Kaufman. I mean, that makes no sense to me.
Yeah, and I think we talk about feeder patterns, and I think I mentioned earlier, you look at Carr Middle School, and if 100% of Carr goes to Kaufman, and right now there are students that are assigned to Carr, that some of them can see Jerome's football lights from their home. I agree. There's work to be done. And when we look at some of those MAP 3 conversations, we've said we aren't going to move middle school kids, but are there conversations we need to look at? And those are things that our team can dive into over the next week and a half, 2 weeks. 2 weeks before the 27th, when as an internal planning team we can get back together, and then to start to look at, to have conversations ready for you as a board and for our public on the 29th. We've got a lot of work that we can do over the course of really the next month, because between now and the November 10th, we're looking at 5 weeks that we have to try to get stuff ready and go. But I'd kind of like, and I think I'm hearing from the 5 of you, keep going. You want some more data points on these 2 maps. You would like us to continue with these 8 criteria remaining the same, and as much as we can to be able to have detailed conversations and get feedback from the public, and have that feedback from the public be heard as part of where we go from here. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm saying keep going, but I also, I apologize. I still don't really understand the process fully, because if you're saying you're not meeting with internal planning for, what did you say, 2 weeks, 2 more weeks?
On the 27th, the internal will meet again, but there are lots of individual conversations. Our cabinet, the members here, all represent members of the internal planning team.
Okay.
And Mrs. Gillis, one of my concerns is, and I said this in my opening statement, to shield our internal planning team, the public attacks, the comments on social media, the communications directly at individual people's homes, the amount of passion sometimes crosses into where it's uncomfortable because of the way some people are handling this. So as a internal planning team, for them to be coming in and walking into my office and saying, hey, I think this or I think that, and conversations we have every day. So the next formal meeting of the internal planning team will be on the 27th. I need to sit down with Mr. Cropper and look at map options. And those are conversations that take place with me and Mr. Cropper. And hey, Mr. Cropper, here are some things that we're concerned about. Are there ways that if we can get from 3 maps to 2 maps and dive a little deeper, those are things that happen between me and Matt. So those aren't internal plan. And as I said, the internal planning team is a resource and a guide for me, and a resource and a guide that gets information for me to bring information to you.
And do you feel that meeting with them on the 27th, that gives you enough time for the 29th, the meeting on the 29th, as far as the internal planning team being able to have a conversation with you and share how they're feeling?
I am 100% certain that if I asked them and said I want to meet on the 23rd or the 24th, that we could do that. I have no question that they would come together and we could meet next week. Part of this depends on how much time Mr. Cropper needs, how much time that you've given us things to think about tonight. I can tell you without hesitation, Mrs. Dietrich and I were working on these slides at 5:20 tonight. Like, this is a rapidly moving process that we're getting new information constantly. And that's good. We get feedback. We get information from you. I have conversations. I talked to 2 of you Sunday night about different information. The individual conversations I have with you are critical in this, leading this process and serving in this capacity.
I guess just on that note, the only thing I would say, you addressed it at the beginning that there were some missteps, but I think what you just said is very important. This is a fluid process. We're not so stringent that this is the way and this is the only way, and I think that's a good thing ultimately for the community, because input is being heard from all of you. It's being shared among the team. Dr. Marshausen is meeting with Cropper, who is the expert that we hired to do this process. So I think there's a lot of sometimes criticism because, oh, well, what changed and how did this change? I think it's a good thing. I think there's a way to look at this and say, this is how we arrive to a better place and a decision that is, sustainable, it's provable, it has weight behind it. So I don't know, I just wanted to say that.
But is it fair to say that we're done with map 2 and that we're starting at the scoring system as a base? Like do you go, okay, this worked in these ways. How can we adjust some lines to, I guess that's what I'm asking. I'm not so asking like who you're meeting with and when you're meeting with them as much as I'm just like, what then is it start from scratch? I guess I'm just trying to understand where we're starting from at this moment then.
We're starting with maps 1 and map 3 as base maps to see if there are improvements that can be made so that if we were to rescore those maps, we get greater consensus that they are closer to, we're not going to get perfect. We're not going to get a map to get 10 out of 10 in 8 categories from 15 people. But can we get closer to where, in my mind, can you get 75% of the possible scores on a map when the criteria are often competing with each other? And that would be, I think, from a statistical standpoint, something that I would like to get to. Mrs. Marple helps me out with the math. And Mrs. Sullivan, who is awesome as a statistician, helps us out. So we've got people who, as we look at this process, we want it to be valid. But Mrs. Gillis, to your comment, I think looking at maps 1 and 3, looking at where they don't score well, and are there tweaks and changes that could be made to that map to improve that map based on our scoring?
Thank you.
As you're doing that, since it was only the internal planning committee that scored it, are you also going to take into account the community feedback to make adjustments and changes, not just where the internal planning committee saw that there needed to be adjustments and changes.
Yeah, and I think it's, Mrs. Messick, to that point, I think eliminating map 2 is easy because the internal planning team scored it poorly and the public feedback was overwhelming that that's something that this isn't going to work. The feedback about, are there ways to look at elementary splits and what does that look like, and can there be changes that may assist that? I don't know if there are, but can we look at that to see if there are? Are there concerns about utilization? Are there concerns about future growth? When you look at busing efficiency, what does it look like on map 3 to improve that busing efficiency and those things? So I think we can use our base as an area to identify strengths and identify weaknesses and look to see if there are things that we can do to bring back to the board for consideration. We have another touch point on the 29th before our goal is to have a decision on November 10th. So I think these are all public steps along the way to demonstrate that we've heard our community, we've heard the concerns that it shouldn't just be one person making these decisions, that it should be public, there should be input, we should have conversations, and that you as the elected members are providing input to me and requests of me to make sure that this process is transparent and fair for everyone.
Thank you for that. I am going to just share something that the community has asked questions about, and that is policy 5120. And a few members of the community have noted that that policy was updated in May, or approved. The changes to it were approved in May. And I just want to give some background on that. So it was updated as part of a batch of 24 policies back in April. The policy committee met on April 9th to review that policy with the batch of other policies. And the first reading was on 4/28, and I personally covered the changes that were made to that policy and why they were being made. And there was a change specifically that people have brought up to F in the paragraph after that. And those changes were made because, and I can read it here, it says, no assignment to schools or attendance schedule shall discriminate against students on the basis of gender, race, religion, disability, or national origin. And that was deleted because it didn't include all included classes, and we already have a non-discrimination policy. So that's why those were changed. And then there was a line on F that said wholesome, so it read, other relevant factors, including those required by law, wholesome and educationally sound balance of student populations, and that was struck, the wholesome and educationally sound balance of student populations, because what does that mean? So that's, I just wanted to clarify that for people that had questions.
So just to recap, we're going to go back. We're going to start with maps 1 and 3 as a base. We're going to look at ways to improve those maps. We will continue to take and incorporate any public feedback. We will continue to work at the internal planning team level, and we'll be ready to come back with you on the 29th. I will also ensure individual meetings with all of the board members prior to that meeting on the 29th to have those conversations and answer any questions that you have that you would have for me. Okay, I've got one more slide tonight that's not redistricting related. Several months ago, we received a letter of concern from the ACLU regarding a situation that took place in May at Jerome High School. In August, I shared with the board that we would have an after-event review of that situation, including legal counsel, to ensure that we took steps necessary to make sure that we were not in a position of discriminating against a student or limiting a student's First Amendment rights. As a result of that after-event review and conversations with our legal counsel, I am asking 4 steps to be taken to ensure that things are more clear. I want to be clear. I believe we followed the policies that we have and that our district administrative team at Jerome handled things correctly based on current policies. But we will review and update policies relevant and guidelines, but not limited to policies 5722, AG 9700A, and AG 5723. Policy committee will be taking a look at those at our next policy committee meeting. We also will work with our staff to ensure that the policies and procedures are communicated as we update all policies and procedures if changes are made. We need to revise our student handbooks to clearly define the process for approving student flyers, materials, and on-campus gatherings. And we need to create a process to track this system when those things are done. Again, we need to be clear, and we need to be clear across all 3 high schools to ensure that students at all 3 high schools and all 5 middle schools are following the same rules. And then finally, we have to identify courses that may involve complex topics and make sure that those teachers of those courses understand how to handle such complex topics so that we don't end up putting the teacher in a position where they are concerned about how they're we want our teachers to feel safe. I'm sure Mrs. Messick can join in that understanding that when there are complex topics, we want our teachers to feel like if they're doing things correctly, that they are protected by our policy and what we're doing. So that's where we are, with a commitment to provide on this date the update from the after action review. And one more thing, as Mrs. Dietrich just reminded me, I need your help because, again, but this is different. On October 29th, we have public participation for non-action items on the agenda. We will be at the City Hall as we will begin that meeting by honoring our national merit winners. My intent would be to create an agenda that has a specific time for our national merit honorees and their families to come to City Hall, and a commitment to the public to not start the portion of the meeting until 6:45. It may not be exactly 6:45, but so that those national merit winners and their families can be recognized, can get their pictures, and then can move out before other folks move in. At public participation at work sessions in the past, I have walked around with a microphone and done my best Phil Donahue impression. At this meeting, I think it would behoove us to allow our public to kind of go to our traditional public participation practice, and we'll be at City Hall, where we will welcome them to the podium. They will have 3 minutes to share their remarks, and then allow the next person 3 minutes to share their remarks. I think we need to be clear in how we communicate this to the public so there are no surprises. Also, we already have more than 20 people who have expressed interest to sign up for public participation at that meeting, and we generally hold ourselves to an hour. How would you like us to go about selecting the people? Is it first come, first serve, and we're done? Because if it's 20 people times 3 minutes apiece, there's an hour. Should we have people sign up till a specific time and then we videotape a lottery where we put their names in a hat and we pick out the 20 people who get to speak and we notify them ahead of time? How do you think, as a board, you would like us to handle that process?
I'm not sure that you can go with those who have already signed up, because I don't know that there's been adequate time or communication for those who want to speak, and I don't doubt it's going to be well over 20 people. So, in my opinion, it would be a lottery system. You know, the 3 minutes. Try to adhere to that, and if hopefully that works, and give them notice. If they are in a lottery system, give them notice, because you don't want them to not be prepared
I would also, this is our only opportunity for public comment in front of the 5 of us. I think there has to be a happy median that extends 60 minutes and recognizes as many people as possible, due to the fact that we have no other opportunity to hear directly from community members face to face.
I would be open to that as well, and I also agree with Diana. I think a lottery system would be the best way to go, because first come, first serve. We don't want people camping out, getting there early, or like we talked about, the one neighborhood only getting those 20 spots. I think we want to avoid doing that.
I think that's the perfect point too. Like, I know people sign up in advance and we know their address. Like, I don't mean to say somebody's more important than the other, but is it, odds are, if there is one person speaking from a certain community, their remarks are going to fall, as I've learned for the past few weeks, very similarly. Is it possible to say, okay, well, we haven't heard from, I don't know. Is it like lottery of neighborhood? I don't know how you do that, but.
Well, a couple comments. One, if we wanted to let everybody speak, it'll be an 8-hour meeting. So I do think there has to be a limit on the amount of time for public participation on the 29th, because I don't think I'm over exaggerating that we could have 100 people who are interested in speaking, and 100 people at 3 minutes apiece is lengthy. I do think what? Thank you. I do like the idea of potentially creating a form, and I'm looking at Mrs. Dietrich, potentially creating a form asking people to identify their neighborhood or their address, and us.
Typically,
Can we legally do that?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Asking them for their address?
No, not the address.
Oh.
But in terms of the selection process here.
I think we could go a strict lottery.
Yeah.
To
I'm just saying you
identify.
can't segment it, though.
No,
I
would agree. It
I think
probably
we need to
would
run
be
that by
problematic.
legal.
I think it would need to be random, and probably not even a hat thing, like some kind of randomizer, like an app or something.
You guys are really drawing on my expertise here.
I will get with the board in a weekly update about what our options are, and I will connect with Mrs. Rigby. I understand what you're all asking for, and I guess what I'd ask for you is, I had thought 60 minutes. Mrs. Gillis suggested longer.
I'm going to jump in real quick. Personally, I'd go 60 minutes and stick to what we've done. 60 minutes is not going to be 60 minutes with 20 people still, from transitions to people that go over, whatever the case may be, having lived through this with COVID and a number of other issues where we've had a lot of people who want to speak. It is very difficult to navigate as it is, and I think that we will find ourselves, when we say 60 minutes, we're still going to be about an hour and a half. I would be shocked if we don't end up at an hour and a half with 20 speakers. So that would be my thoughts on it.
So I will provide you an update of the tools that we find out that we can use, and before we publicize that, I will connect with the 5 of you to make sure that there are no strong objections. But I think I understand the goal.
Just to add on what I was saying too, there's a role and a place, and it's important for people to be able to come here and speak to us and have that engagement. But this isn't 10, 20, 30 years ago. The fact that we have email and everything else that allows accessibility to us is much different. And quite frankly, I get more out of somebody emailing me than I do getting up at the podium. As much emotion, and it's good to see and feel the emotion of somebody speaking. I like to be able to go back and literally go through what the email says, be able to dissect the questions. It provides me a better opportunity. And so as people from the community watch on live stream tonight, I'm not trying to get everybody's inboxes filled up, because we already have enough.
Thanks, Chris.
And if you want, just send it to President Rigby, because she'll handle it all. But I think email, quite honestly, is the more effective way for somebody to communicate with us.
Can I just say also, I want to thank everybody who has been emailing us. I know we have not been able to respond personally to a lot of the emails, but just know that we are actually reading all of them. but it would take us to each have 3 secretaries probably to try to respond to each one.
I'm done with my report. Oh, wait. This concludes the superintendent's report to the Board of Education. Got it.
To be reserved. Okay. If there are no further questions, we're going to move on to reports and action items. From the Treasurer's Office, Mr. Kern.
Yes. So do we have another 45 minutes? If anyways, okay, I'll keep my comments brief, even though we do have the 5-year forecast this evening to talk about. But I do want to talk about other things on the agenda first, and then I'll get into my comments about the 5-year forecast. We do have a list of donations there, lengthy. I think most of them are pretty self-explanatory from that standpoint. I do want to point out the DEP PTO, the DEP Elementary one, for general use in their principals fund. While it says principal and it's discretion of principal, we as our office take the kind of the policy, and we've done this for many, many years, is the principal's fund is intended to be used on students, whether it be student incentives, class or speakers, whatever it may be, other programming activities and so forth. So, and we do monitor that from that standpoint. So I just kind of want to make sure and reiterate, I think I've talked about this before, what the use of a principal's fund is for. I just wanted to point that out for there. Sorry. All right, let's get to the 5-year forecast this evening. We are a little earlier than we've been in the past, a couple weeks. Okay. From that standpoint, some of that has changed due to House Bill 96, which was the current budget that was passed. It's changed in dates and years of the forecast that we submit. Now it's required a 4-year projection of operational revenues and expenditures. That'll have to be filed with the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce by October 15th. We are October 13th, so just in the nick of time from that standpoint, and we'll have an update by the end of February. Yeah, I got it. You got it. From that standpoint, a question that has asked is, why are we presenting a 5-year when the state only requires a 4-year? 2 reasons. One, we talked about tradition. Tradition is we've done a 5-year forecast for many, many years, but the longer a forecast that we have, it allows us for proper planning, whether it's in the short term or long term. I will tell you, we have dates going out that we work with from a projection standpoint past the 5 years. So we think 5 years is a good guide from that, from a traditional standpoint, and as we go forward. But we will meet the requirements of House Bill 96 and submit a 4-year forecast. With that being said, next year, that date moves to August 31st and an update in February 28th. And so, well, I will say it'll make it a little difficult because we don't have our second half tax collections all necessarily in by that date from that standpoint. So kind of think about this from a simplistic standpoint. Your August forecast is really your old May forecast potentially, sort of. And your February forecast is now your old November forecast from that standpoint. But there could change. Something could change in the meantime as we move forward from this year. But this year, October 15th and the end of February. Just to remember, the 5-year forecast is a snapshot based off as we know at this point today. But Dr. Marchallison talked about accuracy. We try to get as accurate as possible because it's a key management tool that we update periodically and continuously throughout the year. We like to have that to be able to use to make, it's meaningful discussions, whether we have challenges we need to be proactive with as we go forward with the decision making, whether it's the board, whether it's our cabinet, whether it's our other admin leadership team. And the last part is we do have notes and assumptions, about 18 pages of those. So as part of that filing that we do, those are included. Those goes into further on some of our assumptions. Just the key line items of 5-year forecast divide 2 sections, revenues and expenditures. A district's revenue is made up of 2 main sources, local and state funding. We have another slide that shows that discrepancy. And expenditures are salaries and wages and benefits, purchase services, supplies, and materials. We've talked and you've heard a lot about in the public. You need the legislature action. Dr. Marshausen served on the governor's task or property tax working group. But as we see it, a lot of this discussion has centered around districts who are on the 20 mil floor, who do emergency levies, who do replacement levies, and so forth. Those do not affect our district. Those affect probably majority of the 610 districts, probably over 400. Those do affect. So this is a big issue throughout the state, and a lot has gone on with that. I would say it's still important that we pay attention to that, what's going on and what's effective to us, as 76.5% of our general operating fund is from our real estate taxes, which is primarily our residential. From that standpoint, I want to point out 2 things out there that could have a potential effect if enacted through us, that is currently going on or has already passed. For example, House Bill 96 included a piggyback tax exemption that allows county commissioners to give a second tax credit for homestead and homeowners 2.5% credit without state reimbursement. This would cost our district $3.8 million if approved by our county commissioners. For those out there who don't know, currently for owner occupied, we get a credit. Owners get a credit of 12.5%. From that district is then reimbursed by the state for those. For old levies, so our most recent 2018, 2023, there is not a homestead and rollback on those reimbursement. The homestead rollback is for age-specific and income-specific taxpayers out there. That change the valuation calculation, that gives them some tax relief from that standpoint. I haven't heard anything from, while we sit in 3 counties, Franklin, Delaware, and Union, I have not heard of anything. We are governed because of predominantly in Franklin County of this occurring so far. I have heard other counties across the state too, I believe, who are looking to do that at this time as you would come for what we would call tax year 25, collection year 26, so your taxes that come up as they are collected on a calendar year basis. That could be impactful as we will continue to monitor that. Another one is House Bill 335, which limits the inside millage increase that a county has on a reappraisal or triennial update. As was originally issued, was a 1% increase. I believe now has been changed to inflationary. So if just for a reminder then as when places go through reappraisal and triennial update, which is not this year, actually Union is going through this year, but next year the biggest portion of Franklin and Delaware will be going through, which would be tax year 26, collection year 27. They'll be going through a triennial update. You would have for inside millage, which we have, there's 10 inside mills that are countywide, or district-wide through the different taxing agencies. We have 4.4 of those millage. So normally when you go through that process, we do get hit by the passing the 1970s House Bill 920, which is, with all this rhetoric that's going on, is still out there and still effective. Now those districts that are on the 20 mil floor, House Bill 920 doesn't affect. They get the full effect of reappraisal. We do not. House Bill 920 reduces that millage down to collect what it was originally approved for, allowing for new construction, though, as we go forward. I was looking at our tax rate information. For example, House Bill 920, from a levy that was passed in 1990 of 8.9 mils, is now being collected on a residential basis at 2.3 mils currently. So that's kind of how House Bill 920 works. But it does allow from inside millage to get the full impact of that increase on there. So, so let's say inflation is at 3%, and we have reappraisal come in at 5%. And so if it can limits at 3%, so every 1% that it gets limited, we would lose an increase of approximately 240 to 250,000. So let's say reappraisal came in at 5%, we would only get 3% on the inside millage, so we would lose 500,000 in that case. So just kind of letting you know what's out there. That would be capped by an inflationary factor. That would be a common inflationary factor that would be done at the county level. So those two bills I know are something that could directly impact us. You know, anything that could happen, like I mentioned, 76.5%. I missed that slide going forward, by the way, sorry. Anything that would happen could have a negative effect on us if it's more significant in those two areas. And those two areas are significant from that standpoint. We would have to make cuts or pass new levies in response if they take bigger steps that maybe hasn't even been introduced so far at this point. There again, I talked about our sources. Here's our sources. 85% come from the local sources. 15% comes from the state of Ohio. 9.2% is our state foundation, which we talk about our state foundation formula. The other state percentage is, when I talked about the homestead and rollback, that is a state reimbursement that we get. Here's our source of expenditures. Almost 85% is we are a service-driven industry. Is salaries and benefits make up that predominant most of that going forward. What I wanted to talk about is just a few of the changes. Really, it hasn't really changed too much from what we had in our May update till now. We still have a positive cash balance projected through June of 2029. But we do start spending more than we are bringing in from revenue. So, and that continues to increase over the forecast. So as we sit right now at 2029, if you looked at line 15.01, unreserved cash balance in May, we were around 16 million. We are around 20 million now at the end of 2029. So. And that's the forecast we'll be filing. We did get a small, why we ask a small increase from that time point. We did get a small bump this year in the state foundation formula. We are actually on the formula. We're not on any guarantees right now with the Fair School Funding Plan. We did get additional funding for what I call additional aid type items, like performance and base funding supplement. Performance of our district when it comes to measurements academically, base funding supplement. Every district got an additional $27 per student, and then our regular and special ed transportation. Mr. Stark talked about the T2 report, and then there's another one called T1 report, and based off of those filings, we do get, the state does fund us based off of those, a portion of that, and so we did get additional funding. So we did. For example, this year, compared to what we had previously estimated in May, an additional $2 million from that standpoint with all those different aid items added up. I'm sorry, $1 million from those items. No, I'm sorry, 2. I apologize there. My math was wrong there. And then we also had additional growth in interest revenue as interest rates have continued to stay higher. And have we let our stuff out? Then also our Medicaid reimbursement in schools and our catastrophic and excess costs, which is filings that we do annually. And then we also get audited. We do our cost report that gets audited by an inside firm that we then file with the Health Department of Medicaid as they accept. Usually after that cost report, we get an additional reimbursement beyond what we've been reimbursed throughout the year. So that did give us an increase for this year and next year. As Medicaid from the federal government down to the state level as looking like potential cuts coming, I don't know if that will continue going forward, but at this point in time, we factored that in with those increases. We do have property value growth due to new construction and reappraisals. We do have new construction, approximately 1% of overall growth from that standpoint each year. In reappraisal, we have next year estimated between Franklin and Delaware about 10% coming in. And so if House Bill 335 is passed, we will not see the full effect of that, and that will have an impact on our forecast. So we'll continue to monitor that. Our collections are still coming in pretty sound, about 98.5 to 99%. So we feel pretty good about that. And finally, on the expense side of things, 8.6% increase in medical insurance premiums. Plan design changes that we made last year to offset the larger increases are still been a positive effect. I know our cohort that we have for our stop loss funding insurance, which is Arlington, Upper Arlington, Worthington, Westerville. I know they're all looking at double-digit and high double-digit increases potentially. So I think with our kudos to our insurance committee that we have that's available to us through our union agreements, we decided, which has representation not only from admin, but both DEA and DSA made changes starting this year that we're in now that has a positive effect going forward. And then I can't also speak to the responsible staffing plan, the effect that has had on getting to a positive fund balance as we go through 2029, be able to extend our levy cycle and what we've been able to do with that. And just to think mind with, we opened a new building this year. We the additional mental health, social workers that we have, and not to increase staffing is hard to do, and on a normal basis, and I'd say most districts. John, how many did we figure this morning maybe we would have added?
We think we would have been 85 staff members higher if we hadn't implemented the responsible staffing plan, and that is every year the cost of that. So the responsible staffing plan and our work with Donna and our association saving tens of millions of dollars a year, which stretches the levy. I think we determined we would have had to go on in 26, stretching that to 28, and it just makes the ask lower too. So we couldn't have done this without our partnership with DEA and the hard work of Mr. Boney and his team and Mrs. Marple and everybody on the team really embracing the idea that we can be more efficient in the work that we do. So it has a tremendous impact on this forecast.
And we'll continue to work with it, and continue to abide kind of it as our plan was to continue this as far out as possible as we can here.
And it's really been just before, if someone leaves, if someone retires, we've done this without any RIFs. We've done this through retirements and attrition. And it's an approach to staffing that just looks at something. It used to be a high school English teacher retired, the principal hires another high school English teacher. Now we're looking at, are we able to be more efficient? We've had to move some people around, which has been hard. But at the end of the day, when it comes to, I still believe, and it's hard to say this on a night when we spent this amount of time on redistricting, the harder work's coming, because when you look at where we're going to be with a budget and the General Assembly's funding of schools right now and people's reactions to property taxes, the hardest work is ahead when it comes to the next board and the work that we're going to have to do. So we keep an eye on this forecast, and our commitment to the community is we're going to stretch it as long as we can. But it takes a lot of work, and Mr. Kern and his team are wonderful to work with.
And I will say this is amid a growing student enrollment population. I think where other districts potentially could get hurt is they've been losing enrollment and haven't changed their staffing. levels through that. And so I think some of them from that that's some of their uproar will be is they haven't looked at this and taken a hard look at these things going forward. Oop, did I go too far? Nope, I did. This is our annual, or my usual slide showing, as you can see, the red and blue lines. I am a little colorblind, so I put red and blue up top there. As you can see, that expenditures on that line as revenues stay flat as we go forward, and then you can see our ending balance goes there. We do fall below our kind of 30 to 60 day window at the end of a levy cycle. We're at 21 days at the end of 2029. So we're almost to that month point at that point, but you know, we're still good at 28. We're over that 2 months, then we get down to that 1 month by 29. I do want to go back to the former slide, and you see that blue line of revenue, how it stays flat. And, you know, we're talking about property taxes, and we're talking about the big increases, and we're not diminishing, you know, it is hard on everybody, and I totally get it. No one wants to pay taxes from that standpoint. But House Bill 920 still does apply to us. So we're not, our residents aren't seeing as big as increases from unvoted levies, whether it's inside millage, which is 20 mil or 20 mil floor districts. The increases that they've had over time is, yes, a little bit on the inside millage, but it's on voted levies from that standpoint and continuous levies. So we're not playing any games, so we're meeting the 20 mil floor or anything like that. We are doing continuous levies that are counted on the House Bill 920, and the example that I give of that millage rate being rolled back to collect what you were collecting when you originally voted in. So just to remind, just kind of want to make sure you as a board we talk about that. That something from I think it was 1976 still applies to us, even though everything that's going on at the state level at this time. Any questions?
Did you go over the purpose clause? Are you finished with the forecast?
Oh, I did want to bring up one thing
Okay.
with the one thing Dr. Marshausen reiterate one point is as we talk about the different pockets of this district, whether it's Jerome Village, whether it's part of our districts that sits in the city of Columbus, or part of our district that sits in the city of Dublin. When I'm talking about tax rates and everything, everyone pays the same rate as everyone else throughout the district. Doesn't matter if you're Franklin, Delaware, or Union. As far as Dublin City Schools taxes, now you may have different local taxes, whether it's a township, a community authority, or wherever it may be in your area. As far as it goes, the residents in those homes will pay approximately 47 mils as of right now for our operating PI and our bond levies. So everyone pays the same tax rate millage.
I have a question.
Yeah.
that It wasn't in your report, but I just remember seeing it in the written report that you had. You mentioned a decrease in Medicaid funding. And
Yeah, I talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, while we did increase it temporarily because our cost report that we filed, but going forward from the federal and state level, you hear about cuts from Medicaid and different other things and reimbursements. So we hope it doesn't happen, but we can see that filtering down to us from that standpoint when it comes to services that we're providing to our students who are eligible.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Thanks.
Did you mention the student activity purpose clause? Because
No, I did
Okay,
not.
okay,
There is
great.
there is a student activity purpose clause on here. Just a reminder of that process that does start at the building level and then goes through, in this case, Mr. Allering's level here at central office, and then we then assign a account code for it. So whatever activities that purpose clause is doing. That's all I have, unless there's any questions from the board.
Okay, if there are no questions, it's recommended by the treasurer that the board approve items 7B through 7D. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Gillis. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Valentine. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Messig,
Yes.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. I don't believe we have a report from academics and student learning.
We do not.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the Department of Operations, Mr. Stark.
We just have a couple of quick items for the board tonight. The first one is we have a few payment in lieu. As said before, these come out throughout the year, and we just have a few more for your approval. And our second item is, and I put some of the details on my weekly report. This is for a new fire alarm at Davis Middle School that will be installed over the summer. The lowest public bid was with Paladin Protective Systems for a contract worth approximately $322,000, and we're asking for a small contingency on top of that for unexpected items. If the board has any questions.
There being no questions, it's recommended by the superintendent that the board approve items 10A and 10B. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. De Silva. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Messick. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Messig,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Reports from Human Resources. Mr. Boney.
Good evening, members of the board. I'll start tonight with our certified agenda. We have 2 certified retirements on. Josephine Burkhoff is going to retire from Davis Middle School with 18 years, and Bob Scott will retire from Kaufman High School with 31 years of service in Dublin. You'll see a few additional 6-period pay requests that we have on tonight for programming. A leave of absence that had been approved at an earlier time but had been left off September's agenda is on tonight as well. The supplementals that are on tonight's agenda are for athletics, student clubs, and building level programming. And then moving on to our classified agenda, there's 2 retirements and then 7 resignations. The retirements are for Foster Kramer, who's going to retire from Dublin Jerome High School with 25 years, and then Cindy Worley, who will retire from Mr. Kern's shop with 30 years in Dublin City Schools. There are also 6 new hires and just a few leave of absences on for your approval as well. And we do not have any stipends on tonight, so that concludes our portion.
Okay, it's recommended by the superintendent that the board approve items 12A and 12B. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Messick. Second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Gillis. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Messig,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Yes. Motion passes 5-0. Does anyone have any items for board discussion, future agenda items? Okay. We are now going to move into executive session. In accordance with Ohio Revised Code 121.22G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, the Dublin Board of Education will go into executive session to consider the employment of a public employee. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Gillis. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Valentine.
All 3 of us.
Or
All of us.
all of us. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Messig,
Yes.
and Mrs. Rigby.
Yes, and just so the members who are here tonight know, or the audience members know, the board is going to move into executive session and nothing further will come out of executive session after we're finished. Thank you.